polish their sword a little, that's all. There's a way to tip swords. Now, what she was using was a crystal sword, and they're useful, but you don't really need one if you have a crystal body that's working, all right? But if you need to project it out into crystals, I like crystals. I like to play with crystals. They can help. But to that degree, well, you know, to each his own. It's like taste, you know. You know, some people like, you know, bright red things. Some people like very subdued, pale brown things. So it doesn't really matter. But anyway, there's a way to polish those things. And you just create a little ball of frequency inside yourself and ever so gently send it on a nice roll with lots of love out your heart chakra and let it gravitate to the tip. Well, we sent them one, and what it would do would be just send whatever kind of blessing, you know, for them. We wouldn't stop them. We have no right to stop them because it would make our behavior would be as bad as their behavior has been. And that's the best way to end up in the same playpen. Okay? But they have a right to do what they're doing, and so do we. So we just gave it a little transducer, which allowed a split. So theirs could run this way and ours could run this way because there was one among them that they didn't know that was hosting out and agreed to allow it to happen. Or they would have, you know, not been there when we were there. So there was a little deals going on up there between their guys that they didn't even know about. That there was one that was like, okay, well, we know if we go and do this stuff in front of that person and what comes with her, we know they're going to do something. And the deal was, okay, we could uncap it. It would take about 10 minutes extra, which is a pain. We have enough work to do. If you guys uncap it, then we don't have to blow the cap off it, do we? Okay, which we would have done because we have the right to, because they're damaging the grids to the point where the planet is going into rebellion. We didn't have to uncap it. They undid the key. They even left the crystal there, the key in the hole, which was kind of nice of them. But they did that because one among them had agreed to allow that to happen. And I'm not going to say who, because I wouldn't do that publicly, because I think I know which one it was. But that was kind of a neat little... the whole thing unfolded in a way that was fascinating because it showed in 3D manifestation the stuff that was going down in council. It was right there in front of our faces. And it was really neat because I knew there's two people, actually, I felt that were wanting host, but they didn't dare let their collective know. They're actually frightened of the Michael energies. And it was just really neat to see, and it's not the first time we've seen it, where you'll have council agreements and things going down, where you have, you know, guys that have fallen and they're in trouble with Metatronic seed atoms, and they really want to try to do something different, and they want to get out and they want help. Our guys will help them if they can. But there's a thing called a fair exchange of energy. That means if you come to a workshop and the person giving the workshop has to pay the hotel that the workshop is going to be in and still has to, like, you know, isn't going to live in a cardboard box and never take a shower and have bugs and stuff because they have no income, because they give everything and never allow the universe to give back to them. All right, if you're going to be like that, we're just going to roll with that because the Glastonbury crew. We have people like that in a workshop once. We're light workers. We should be able to come here for free. Why should we have to pay for the rest of the workshop? And we actually let them come in. And, you know, and they said, well, we don't have it with us now, but we'll pay. You know, we'll finish paying it. Yeah, they did. We're planetary service workers. Why should we have to pay? He said, this whole group of people that came here, planetary service workers. I'm a planetary service worker. Do you think the hotel people care? Do you think they're not going to bill us for this room? Do you know how much it costs to rent one of these rooms for these workshops? Why do we charge? Because we have to live. That's why. You know, I mean, this kind of stuff. There's a fair exchange of energy. So when one of their guys comes and says, help, I got myself in trouble. Oh, yeah, big time. And I'm really, really sorry. Would you please help me out of this one again? You know? It's usually again, right? I mean, this is very old drama at this point. There's no children in the universe that the beloveds don't know at this point, probably first name, last name, and every other mask they wore. But when it gets bad, they tend to come back and say, help. I'm sorry. And I really don't mean the I'm sorry, but it works for the moment. And we know that too, and we just consider it a condition of the insanity. That's why we act equally insane and keep saying, okay, you can come back. But you say, all right, you're asking for something, and it's appropriate that you give something in return. And it's not that the beloveds want anything in return, but what they want is for them to learn the lesson of that you don't ask, can I have, can I get? Say, what can I give? Is the best way to get what you want. And not to manipulate. Because if you genuinely want to give something that will benefit all life everywhere, that will benefit, you know, the goodness for someone or something, the universe will respond in kind. And they're trying to teach them these lessons. So they said, okay, you guys would like us to run interference for you again, right? You want the Adani host? Okay. You can thank the Adani for opening the doors for that. What do you have in mind? What do you mean? Well, you've asked for something. Okay. Is there something you'd like to ask us? Not really. Shall we remind you? Yeah. Is there something perhaps you could do for us? Oh, is there something you want us to do? That's how it went down. And it was basically one of these, yeah, you know that tour over there in England? Well, we have a group going over there, and it will save you guys a lot of trouble of having to pick up the pieces of the cap, because we're going to have to shatter it, you see, because you're hogging the whole thing to yourself, and it actually belongs to all of us. So you could go in there and unlock the key, and then we could all use it nicely and fairly right next to each other with no problem at all. And you can have your host if you want to. If you're willing to assist here, well, you want us to assist you. Well, we're not going to be able to assist you if that thing's still stuck in the middle of the planet and you can't run any frequency through, because you're all going to go down with your buddies that you're trying to get away from. So they kind of said, oh, okay. And they literally came and they undid it. And at first I was like, uh-oh, what's going on here? Something strange. When I started seeing the sword going the whole bit. Ooh. Are these like, all right, guys, what's happening here? You know? Do I just mind my own business and do nothing, or am I supposed to do something, or what would you like me to do? And I just got this really graceful feeling coming down. Well, that's all right. They're just opening it for us. Oh, I was going, oh, thank you. So I was able to send the lady love as she's having her Archangel Michael ceremony and hailing Archangel Michael and all that stuff. You know, it's okay. She probably would have liked me less if she knew who I was when she first started. It was only later that she figured out that, oh, the Voyagers, those guys, you know. Anyway, when we get into anatomy of eternal creation, this is why we don't really have to use crystals. I do like to play with crystals, I must say. But we are crystals, and we're going to learn from some of the stuff we started with, Section 8. This is a lot of stuff that if we're going to teach Kathara 2.3, which this workshop isn't about teaching Kathara 2.3. At this point, you should have there are videos that teach Kathara 2.3, and there is the book set coming out that has more of the detail in here. I don't need to read to you all these little bits of stuff, and I think they're in there anyway. I think they're in your chart packs anyway. These ended up in there too, didn't they? Yeah. So you can read that, so you get a preview of the what was Section 8 about after all. We don't have Section 9 done yet, though. We still have bits of Section 9 where it was left before. Yes, you have lotus points, and here are light balls that phase and make crystals. Oh, okay. How do they go together? I don't know. Now we know. So we're going to learn that here, and that's going to go back into Kathara 2.3. All right. Now, yeah. These I'd put together for the portfolio pack for Kathara 2.3. What we're doing is integrating all of them, where every one of these little microscopic ones that you can't read. The reason I don't care that you can't read them is because in the manual, they're each full sheets. All right, so all of those words are big in the manual when you put the two together. These make good at-a-glance references once you read this stuff and know, from the big sheets, to help you remember the sequence of things in a quick info bite. Like you remember that when it actually starts with the one before that. It starts with the anchoring of the monadic beam, where you go from templates into the beginning of the manifestation or the densification cycles in the Eka. This is where things start to go 3D from being flat templates. And it starts with anchoring of the monad that we'll talk about a little bit more later when I get into the matrodon cell and stuff. But the creation of the rod and the staff and the lotus arcs, all that's explained in Kathara 2.3. The formation of the Lodi lines, all that's explained. And when you look at the detail in some of this stuff, I mean, just what is explained when you read the Kathara 2.3 manual, there's a lot of detail there. It's like, I remember thinking, do we really need to know all this? You just say we have Lodi lines, and here's what you do with them. But then again, that would be much more like certain other teachings that don't tell you enough, so you can't tell whether you're being twisted or not. So we have detail. So it shows how the Lodi lines are created. It shows the 5 shields. What's interesting is this whole structure is before you get to the 5 density bodies. All right? There are a series of, from the center outward, of spheres, or crystal bodies, that expand. These are the etheric bodies. They come out at one at between D13.5 and 13.5. The next one in is between D12.5 and 0.5. The next one in is between D11.5 and 1.5. And the next one in is between 8.5 and 4.5. And then there's one at the center that's at 6.5. And all of these together are the core template of the etherics, of what creates the morphogenetic templates behind what becomes the densities. So it's a much larger structure than it might at first appear. And once we get through these guys, and these were a bit tough because it was all right. Once we got to here, I know there's a lot of people going, how does that work? That's interesting. Okay, a spark comes out and hits this little flat thing on the shield, and somehow it stands up and becomes a vector vortice, and that goes out there and somehow becomes that. Oh, great. No problem. Right, sure. Yeah, I remember thinking, are there a few more diagrams that go with that? Because I know I could feel it, like, okay, I can get the gist of that, but there's definitely some technicals that I don't understand, and it's all right for now. In California, it was really funny in that workshop because they said, don't even try. There are a number of illustrations that needs to go with that. We can take it from here to here. What they need to do is get to the lotus points and use them and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the most important. Okay, because I would have been there for 6 weeks doing the diagrams. I was there for 6 weeks after we're doing the diagrams that went with it. So we're getting diagrams that show us not only do we have the Lodi lines, it goes from the rod and the staff and the spinning vortices and the arcs forming to, I mean, this all comes out of the 12 pillars anchoring, creating a 12-pillar spindle in the center, and then the arcs forming as the pillars arc energy outward, and then the spindle expanding out to become the Lodi lines, and they're running up and down, but these start arcing and different things, arcing and sparking. What they're attached to are the nodes, the shield nodes. If you want to go absolutely node crazy, you can read some of the diagrams that are in your packs there. They had me turned inside out mentally. These were the ones that were actually showing the spins of nodes for the radius lines, the natus lines, the axiom lines, the meridian lines, and how they all line up together, what spins in what direction, and that kind of thing, and what polarity it has. They were coming in fragments, and first it would be this way, then it would be that way, then it would be this way, that way, and which set goes with what. So it took a while to do those. They were the diagrams from heaven, but they felt like they were from hell. Yeah. I guess anything from heaven that passes through hell is a bit rough. Anyway, so we went from the Lodi lines that were created by the 5 shields. And the 5 shields are interesting because we found that we had this thing called the ethos shield down here. Now, one of the things I didn't get time to do was I wanted to explain even more so about ethos and eros, which we do in here when we get into the matrodon cells and the phasing of the cells. But there's a series of diagrams that actually show the ethos shield that we have your density 4, density 3, density 2, density 1 in the PCM universe. Then you have this thing called an ethos shield. Where'd that come from? That was set at the same time of the monadic seeding, when your seed atom flames were set. The ethos and the eros template were set through the monad and the replica of the matrodon cells. And there's actually a whole Cathara grid that goes with this. This is, the way it's shown here, it represents density shield 4. Because there's another whole Cathara grid upside down, coming down here, and that would be the ethos Cathara grid that goes with the PCM universe. And if you pull it all up this way, where they're in line with each other, you have the density 4 PCM shield here, and you have the density 4, because it's upside down, right? Ethos shield here. The ethos is the light imprint, and the eros is its counterpart, which is the sound body imprint. It gets a little complicated because technically we end up with an eros up here. And there's this phasing that happens where that one comes down, this one comes up, and they do stuff in the center and create the matter bodies in the center. Except the one that's up here belongs to the parallel, belongs to the PKA Loti. But ours comes out this way. So what we have, and we'll see it later, is the shape of the matrodon. Again, we have the cells of the matrodon, which I won't even go into until I show you the diagram. But for when we're talking about this, it would have helped if I'd had time to do another diagram, but really I didn't have time to do the ones I did, but since you're patient, we did them anyway. So at least you'd have a full pack of things that make sense together. But think of this as an upside down electrical Cathara grid that's running through that actually gives you the electrical etheric template for the manifest system, and it interacts with another one that phases down from the top that's called the eros, that's from the low tie side. All right? So this is the Maharic shield we've been using, by the way. It has been our ethos imprint shield, the one below our feet. Okay? Yeah. We've also had a problem because things aren't in the place they're supposed to be. In the Eka base shield, you can use the Maharic shield, and it's because we've been running D12 frequencies that we are able to actually activate part of the Eka base shield. There's a little bit of the Maharic shield, of the density 4 ethos shield, that was left in a proper position where it was reachable. The other parts of it were twisted at really bizarre angles and held together with broken parts of its own rod and wedged through our bodies, where you couldn't pull the ethos pillar up anymore, which meant it couldn't make spark energies. Because we have at the centers of the Iyumbi center, I don't think I have them on this diagram, but as we know, we have the Iyumbi center, the Azure center, and the Rajna center embodied, and they are ethos flame centers. There's little flames of frequency, little radiation units in there. Now, the ethos template also has its own little flames in those same centers. So when you bring that one up into this one, those little flames interact with each other, and they make sparks. And these sparks go into the central column inside of the body, into the breathing tube, and eventually they accrete where enough sparks are built up that allows the radon cells, that we'll get into later, to open, and allows more energy to come in from the Lota levels, from the outer crystal body levels, so the breathing can take place naturally. We've been literally held by the throat, the planet's been held by the throat for a very long time now, with the inability to move the ethos template up and down. Part of it was stuck down here. We have part of it down below our knees, wedged below our knees. That's why there's some strange things happening, like when you start to loosen that. I remember getting a cyst right in the area where one of the flame cell centers is on the D3 level, and I had to really have a showdown with it and say, all right, if I have to call a doctor, I will. But you're going to leave. Are you going to leave of your own volition, or shall we just go call a doctor and get the scalpel out? Because I don't care, you're not staying there. But it was directly in relation to the beginning of clearing this stuff in the, where the rod could come back up and down again. Because each one of these, if you remember, the Cathara grid implies a rod and a staff. Same thing with the ethos and the eros. They have the same configuration as a natural Cathara grid. They just run different frequencies. They run the simple way to understand the difference between the frequencies that would be the 15 ray currents over on this side in our PCM in our Eka is that the 15 ray currents would be base Le'atore, which means they come from the Le'atore of this Eka flame. All right, they're center core flames. They're sparks of the Le'atore flame of our Eka. The etherics come through the Matrodon. They're manufactured in and through the Matrodon and its relationship to the Eka flame here, which means they come from the Le'adore flame, or the twin flame of our Eka. So the etherics and the catherics are base Le'adore, where the anything that becomes density currents here or even like the outer ray currents, the primal light field currents, they are Le'atore based. And it's when the two interact with each other that you actually get manifestation taking place. The same works over there on the parallel Eka side. They have an imprint of our Eka flame. Inside of their Le'adore flame, they have an imprint of the Le'atore flame. So they have the male inside their female, and we have the female inside our male. And it's the interaction between the two that creates the etheric and catheric templates, which are the things you don't see, well, normally, but if you turn your inner vision on, eventually you can, but they're the things you don't see in the physical manifest that actually hold the form together of the physical manifestation. So that's one of the easiest ways to understand. I know there's a lot of, well, what are the etherics anyway, when that started to come through. And I was asking those questions like, oh, okay, ethos, eros. And then they started talking about photos and manos and all sorts of other oses and got me lost. I said, what are these? Where do the etherics come from? Where do you? And then that's when they started to explain about the Matrodon, about the phasing of this particular cell that creates a blended current that takes part Le'adore and part Le'atore and progressively makes different currents from that. They're the ones that step down into the flames here. Shalaya is a blended current. All right, so that is a bit Le'adore and a bit Le'atore mixed together. And there are different stages. Some are more Le'adore, some are more Le'atore. Then you have atmic, which would be Le'atore, because they're from the Eka here, right? You'd also have etheric atmic, which would be from the Eka here, but out of the Laedore Matrodon. And it gets really confusing when you start breaking it down into the levels of the crystal body, because you get a different combination every time they interact with each other. And this was driving me absolutely crazy. So I was trying to, is there a way to get this fast for them? It's going to take me 6 years to translate this book, because there's a book on currents, literally, one like a book in the Mahabharata text. It's all about currents and what bonds to what and what they're shaped like, and the geomancies of each, and how the units of radiation bond, and what things push away from each other and what things draw to each other. Oh boy. It's like a physicist's dream, probably. As somebody like me, it's a nightmare, because I get lost in space with this stuff, and I get totally dyslexic in my head. Oh, get me out of here. But we're learning enough now. There's enough in the material there. I wouldn't say I could do it off the top of my head, especially when I'm tired and I haven't slept. I think I got a half hour in the car on the way down. I wouldn't even try. But there's enough information there to give you an idea of how these currents phase. I wanted you to understand more than anything as far as where the currents go. It's not so much about memorizing what the currents are or any of that. To know you have an etheric blueprint, to know it's made out of eros and ethos, and they combined and create different stages of matter. But to realize that matter here is made of quarks and elementary units, and those elementary units are the direct manifestation of sparks, spark pulse currents that are created through the anatomy levels of the crystal body structure. That is the missing link that science is always looking for. They're just looking in the wrong places. They're looking on the outside when the whole structure is on the inside. We all actually, if we're operating naturally, our bodies act as suns. We actually generate heat. We are photocells. And we're beginning to have the ability now to turn our photocells back on. It also means we can interact with rays in a different way, where, let's say, we'll be more photoresponsive. Our bodies would be more photoresponsive. Some bodies really crash and burn fast when certain things in the template interact with wave spectra here. Sun. Some people do get cancer from the sun. Not everybody does. In fact, a lot less people do than they think they'd lead you to believe. The sun can do some wonderful things for you, like inadvertently, accidentally spark some of your photocells into activation, which might spark your DNA. So there's a bit of a campaign to make sure people are afraid of the sun, and at least make sure, because it's absorbed through the skin, at least put something on that will barrier it. Then you can go out in the sun, and it won't hurt you. Oh, just don't look at it. It might activate your pineal, for God's sake. I wouldn't suggest go staring at the sun, but there is a level where you can get with the body and the cells where you could look directly at it, in it, through it, and see what's really there and not harm your eyes. Now, you wouldn't want to go out and try that until you get your photocells working on the inside, because you will fry your circuits on the outside until your body is able to tolerate those radiation levels from the inside out. So it starts with the inside. It starts with turning on the photocells in the body, and you are built of photocells. In fact, every one of your cells is meant to be a photocell, but it's almost like it had its fuse taken out, so it can't receive the arcs of energy that are naturally trying to come in. But it wasn't taken out. It was just left dormant. It was unplugged. And we are being given the technologies to plug those cells back in. And this is really exciting. I mean, it's not always fun. You know, when the frequency starts coming in, like I'm feeling it coming in now, and I don't know why, but I'm getting a massive spasm in my back, right here. And that usually means coming in from above. You know, it's usually my knees and my ankles that go when it's coming in from below. It doesn't last, you know, but it's not fun when it happens. Why? Because the cells are going, what's that? That's another level. Oh, no. You know, here we go. And it gets used to that level, and that doesn't give you any discomfort anymore, and you feel fine. The thing is, you get stronger every time. And the crystal body and your own Maharic shield won't allow so much to come through that it damages you. That's the difference between working these technologies and working Kundalini technologies that just play with inadvertently trying to pop those currents that they know are in there, because they pop just like taking drugs to pop something, where it misfires stuff. You have frequency flying all over, and you can really damage yourself if you're not using the sequences of seal releases that are natural to the body. This whole system, as we've talked about before in other workshops, is completely built on what was the natural crystallic structure of this body, because that's the structure that needs to be used if you're going to turn it back on and not damage yourself. If you're trying to override the Maharic shield that holds the divine blueprint so you can go play with your energies, good luck. You may spontaneously combust. You know, and that can happen. It's a little hard in these days, at this day and age, because most people can't run enough frequency to do that. On occasion you find a few, but they usually have a little bit of help from not friendlies above. You hear those cases of people that spontaneously burst into flames for no apparent reason. Yeah, they're usually actually associated with abductions. There's very rare occasions when somebody actually has distortions enough in their system where their DNA starts to explode itself, where literally the flames start to fire and misfire, and you can spontaneously combust your form. I mean, it's not one of the, you see these on those shows that say, is it real or is it not? You know, it's reported in history that this has happened. What do you think? You know, it can happen. It's not very frequent though. But you're not going to spontaneously combust with this stuff. But from what I hear, we're going to be slowly turning ourselves back into what we originally were, which are pulsars. Now, that makes you think, if we're pulsars and our bodies were actually able to hold our form inside of this big pulsar, who might stars be? Think about it. If we look like that on the outside, we're looking at beings. We're calling them stars, lumps of rock and fire. What's inside those lumps of rock and fire? They're whole entities, collectives of consciousness. Some of them are fallen, some of them aren't. The ones that pulse, there's several stages of pulse. There's also something that the Metatronic Merkaba does before it's getting ready to do its final grand hurrah, where it throws out so much energy into itself, it expands so far that it finally goes kind of like a whale that explodes. They'll pulse a bit too. So not all things that pulse, like stars that pulse, are breathing. It depends on the type of pulse. Erratic pulses tend to mean Merkaba speeds are stopping and starting and doing things that are indicating there's a problem. But there's a steady pulsing, steady pulsar waves coming in and out. Pulsar waves turn into other types of waves. According to what they've said, the waves that come in from the lota, they come in through these lines that, oh, I love that word, what is it? Heliopaths. Yes, I was thinking like homeopath. No, it wasn't. Paths, like paths to travel, right? Okay, lines to travel, like railroad tracks, kind of things. Heliopath, they call them radionic heliopaths. These are particular. There's more to come. Yeah, there's still more to come. But these are the waves that when we talked about in K23, and there was that kind of random illustration of something that was said to show the transfiguration points in the waves. These are transfiguration waves. They actually cycle and morph from one type of form to another, from one type of radiation cluster current to another. They can be particle waves, or they can be particles or waves. They can be liquid or solid. They can be ether, and meaning like you say gas or something like that. So there are these waves come in, and then they transduce down. They come through these heliopath lines into the radon cells. The radon cells collect them and store them and transform them into different types of frequency. And then when the pillar interacts in a certain way with the rest of the anatomy, and it says ready, and a vacuum occurs inside the tube. It's like the body acts like a cathode tube, I think, a cathode ray, and I don't even understand any of that stuff. I never read one of those how-to books on how's that TV work? But it's kind of something like that, where once the vacuum is created in the center of the pillar, the frequency that was put into the radon cells releases and gives a new flood of frequency in to allow to come into manifestation. And that vacuum occurs because the outer crystal body kind of draws out the energy that was spent that had gone out into manifestation, then came back in. It's hanging out in the pillar. It sparked some. The sparks do something. And see, I'm trying to get this process. I'm learning this too. But the sparks create enough charge where it begins the process of, I think, they've described the radon cells like membranes, say little membrane capsules, that after a certain amount of sparks are generated, it weakens them, where they start to dilate. And once they dilate, they will release their thing, and at the same time, the outer levels of the crystal body are sucking energy out of the pillar. So by the time the frequency is coming in from the radon cells, the new frequency that was deposited in them by the outer crystal body levels through those heliopath lines. This is hard, believe me. New words all over the place, right? But once the frequency comes in, stored in the radon cells, the same lines draw energy back out. Now, they're the ones that brought in the plasma waves. Put the plasma waves inside the radon cells, right? Radon cells are holding them. Then those heliopaths reverse current. This gets into the meiotic diotic grid stuff that we talked about. The little vortices reverse. and they draw the energy out, creating a vacuum in the pillar, and then the radon cells open and bring new energy in. And it's all about expansion and contraction, where the inside expands, the outside contracts, and vice versa. And it's a breathing rhythm. And we have some diagrams. I've gotten some of them. There's a bunch more that I would have liked to, different angles of showing things, that would have helped. But that's only because I'm a bit slow, and I like to make sure I understand something, so I do it like from 6 different perspectives to make sure I got it. Didn't have time to do that. But we do have some that show the basics of that. What's really precious about this is we can control this process. We can reactivate it, first of all. This is the natural process of how we're supposed to breathe, the eternal life breathing. The first step was opening the nadradon, or activating the nadradon, which was one of the photocells, the magnetic photocells. It's down at between 0.5 and 1.5. If you look at the Cathara grid, and you look at where K1 is, and you say K1 is D1, so 1.5 is a half step up, and 0.5 is a half step down from there. This is how you find the locations on the Cathara grid. But there are also locations in frequency, in wave bands. So there's this whole 0.5 system that runs all the way up, the Cathara grid. That is the etheric system. So the etheric bodies and the things it manufactures, including the chakras, are supposed to run on the 0.5 system, where they take energy from the 0.5 etheric, step them down, blend them with other currents from this side, from the Laetore side, and create atomic currents. Right now, our chakra systems are totally misaligned, because they're plugged in, they're actually offset, and it totally offsets the DNA. This is where we get the base code pairs. They're not supposed to plug into each other the way they do, and there's supposed to be a bunch more in between there. We're supposed to have a base 12 genetic alphabet as a human. As an indigo, it's more than that. But we all have base 4 here. Why? Because of the mutation that is held. It's held in these lines, it's held in the shields, and it's held in all of those things by the most important thing we're going to learn through this whole workshop. And that's about the Rushite spiral. And that's that spiral of energy that originally, in your original creation imprint, connected you to each of the cells and the matradon in the Eka. It was through those currents that we're able to have the Lota, the Eka Lota, the PCM Loti, and the PKA Lotai phase together, where they can transfer and circulate currents between each other so they continually spark in the proper ways that keeps the whole system going. This system hasn't been able to breathe since this mutation has been here. So we are going right into the pillar with the exercises we're doing this time. I think it's this evening, it's sometime this evening, I'm not sure what time, but they're going to give us one this evening because they want us to eat one of the techniques. And this is going to be fun because they're not in writing. So it's either going to come through some part, I don't know, dinner's at 7:30, isn't it? 8, okay, so the 8 o'clock dinner break. Maybe it'll come through then. I'll see if I can get it on paper, because I'd like to get it on paper, but they haven't put any of them on paper yet. But we're going to learn how to do the double breathing that will get the breathing tube open and begin the sparking process. But the thought that, to realize every time you breathe, I mean, you can start playing with just breathing. What's my pillar doing? Can I feel it? There's subtle things you can actually start to feel when you become aware that you have this breathing tube. Now, it's pretty dormant. It's just circulating energy. Static energy is what it's been doing since the mutation's been in place. We're opening now. We're being given the gift of being able to open quickly the whole breathing tube. It usually takes quite a cycle to be able to do that, particularly when you're crawling out of a hole of DNA mutation like we are here, because this isn't a funny one. This is an extremely severe DNA mutation that's on this planet. It's an extremely severe planetary grid mutation that we're in the middle of. But we wouldn't be here if we didn't know we could handle it. We're here because we knew we could handle it, and we knew we could take on the disease, create an immunity within ourselves, heal ourselves, and then heal the planet, the part of it that wanted to be healed. And that's what we're going to do. But it's really exciting when you start to realize, every time I breathe, you hold your breath and you start to try to feel for those sparks. They're in there somewhere. They're starting to happen again. Eventually, it's not going to be, ooh, did I feel a spark? Right? Ooh, I think I felt one or two. It's going to be, yo! Whoa, heat rush. Yeah. You may get flaming feet on occasion, where you're kind of like jumping around. Whoa, yeah, I felt that one. You may get, one of the things I've been getting recently, and I think it has to do with the second set of arcs phasing, is this really quick cone effect, where I feel like a cone came down over my head, That goes away quick, but my whole skull goes numb. Like electrical buzz, it goes, oh, cool. It's like when you lay on your arm and you're sleeping and you wake up and your arm is like all over, you can't control it. Well, your whole scalp feels like that. It's really strange. And then it goes away. It doesn't stay. It doesn't do anything damaging to you. But you definitely start to say, felt that one. You're wonderful, because when you activate, you just radiate like a heater. You change color. You run. Yeah. I mean, there are physical. It gets physical at some point. It may start out very subtle, but some of the earlier activations were given that. What is this going to do if we're turning on the pillar of power? I mean, it's so exciting to be able to get this back. I'm excited about it. I'm going to take a drink because I'm starting to stick together. My lips are starting to stick together. Excuse me. Oh. All night long. I get so engrossed in diagrams I can't. I pour a hot one, and by the time I sip it, it's cold again. So I just get used to drinking cold coffee because it's too annoying to get up every time and get a new one. Anyway, I think we have an hour before the coffee break thing, right? So that means we can get into some of the more juicy stuff, which would be fun. Juicier. All right. This is basic stuff you've seen before. We have the basic crystal body templates. Shows how the density and the primal light templates come together. I'm not going to get into these balls right now. These are part of the Moda Adhure system, actually, which is part of the monadic flame sets that assist in anchoring the photocells. There's a whole set of dynamics that take place between them. We don't have all of those now. We have the key elements, which are the radon cells and the monad itself. So we're going to be talking about that, like as we progress through this diagram chart. So this is just to show you where we came from. Again, there's the big one on the rod and the staff. You can put that one on. Yeah. Thank you. Just for some people who only saw the California one and said, I can't read any of that. It's microscopic. Yeah, it was, because there's big ones. There are big ones, so now you do have the big ones in case you didn't have those before. So you can read all the little type on those little consolidated diagrams. Keep going, honey, please. We saw our Lodi lines and those kind of things. What we're going to see soon is diagrams that were added between ones that were given to us in K23. This was the beginning where finally we got a little bit closer to the actual, what did those Lodi lines look like when they formed the light grid? We finally got a better drawing of the light grid shape, because before it was like, yeah, I know it has lines, but I have no idea what angles they come down at, right? I could see it, but I couldn't draw it. It wouldn't stay still long enough. So they said, show the inside of it and indicate that it's there. That was the original. We have this going on inside of it, but they now have given us the lines and how they line up with the nodes and the specific node numbers. So this gets very specific, where axiotonal lines, meridian lines, all of these things have very specific numbers. These are the node numbers. If this is the shield, right? And if you looked at that shield, we had the other diagram where it showed looking down on the shield. It showed where the 6 was, where the 12 was, where the shield was aligned. Some were on this axis, some were on the 45 diagonal axis. And that made the nodes numbers run in different sequences, and that's how we end up with our axiotonal lines and our meridian lines. It's about these nodes. What we get into in a little while is we see how the nodes, some of them are positive charge, some of them are negative charge. And what's interesting about a node is, I looked that word up. So you use this word a lot, node. What is a node? Well, a node is kind of the point of lowest vibration between two waves, or between two movements. And that's exactly what it is. It's the still point that you have a diode and a myode, one with a positive charge, one with a negative, doing their thing, and then you have the still point, the node, the still point in between the waves. So that word even fit in terms of the definitions that were here that I didn't know what they were. I didn't even realize node was a word here, actually. I tripped over it one day under ends in my science dictionary and went, oh, look at that. Diode is too, but I don't want to get into that one. That's where we get into negative, cold cathodes and warm anodes and all sorts of wild stuff. When we get into the crystal body, however, though, it comes down to certain parts of it function as negative cathodes, which I believe give off negative charge units and take in positive charge units, and anodes, which are their opposite. So when we're talking myodes and diodes, they work very much in the way we use those words. Myodes I didn't find in any science dictionary, but it's the opposite of a diode, which would imply certain things, because diodes you can find in science dictionaries with, they're about electricals. We got these diagrams just to show that this combined on the proper axes of the PCM Lodi, PCM Loti, PKA Loti. If I say it fast, I trip. Eka Loda. These are the three axes. There's the Eka axis, that's the parallel Veka axis, and that's our axis. When you put these for each one of them, because each one of those has one of these, when you put them together, it forms this light grid. And this is the basic Lodi line light grid that draws to itself more units of radiation as we progress. And this fills out to become a really beautiful structure. It forms a teleosphere, and then more of those within that. Now, teleospheres are interesting. They're those little things that have to do with vector vortices, where you have the little template in the shield, and a pulse of energy comes flying out the shield line. There's a better explanation of it in the new diagrams, where it takes it from, okay, you got this flat telea screen, imagine it as if it were, right, in a crystal body shape or a sphere, where we do have, you have diagrams now showing this. So let me move forward a little bit, please. I'm just going to move through these quick. These, again, were the stair-step vortices that were formed by the Lodi lines on the interior Lodi lines, because way back in the explanation of how it first started with the Lodi lines, we had external Lodi lines going out that way and then internal ones being drawn toward the center. They formed vortices that became the stair-step vortices that take currents up and down. Now, these currents are still Le Ettore base currents. This is before we plug in the full etheric spectrum. Okay, so the Lodi lines are actually Le Ettore, which means they come from this side. When we get into the real interesting stuff is when the etherics and the catherics come in, that are from the matrodon cell, that are blending. These are the blended currents that first form the etheric blueprints that the others fill out on. Okay, next one, please. That we've seen before. That's just to remind us of crystal body, and when we have the crystal body structure with the stair-step vortices from the PCM universe, that's our axis. This is the PKA Loti axis, but it's also the axis of our primal light field. So our primal light field runs through this way on our rod and our staff. And these spin, and the vortices spin, and they send energy back and forth and through. That was simple enough, but boy, do the flows get complex when they start to circulate in through here. It's rather fascinating. I didn't feel that way about 6 o'clock this morning. I was trying not to swear to myself. Not at it, not at anybody, just in frustration. Yeah, this is where the Merkaba fits inside of this crystal body and extends out actually beyond it a little bit, but its main area is inside of it. This would actually go up to D14, parallel 14, because you have the parallel light shield running this way, where our light shield, our primal light shield, runs this way. So there's a whole set of seals. We have up to our Cathara Center 12, then we'd have 13, and then it goes into the parallel light grid. If you remember the Veka maps, you have the parallel going up there. And if that weren't interesting enough, where we have the parallel there and the parallel over there and our primal light field here, now we've got ethos coming down this way. We've got eros from over there going up this way. We've got our eros going over that way. And we've got their ethos going out this way. It gets really, really complex. And it wouldn't be important to learn about that complexity if it weren't important to understand your pillar of power. And all of this is about getting to the point where you can see enough of how things fit together, where you can get the fact that, oh, okay, I have this photocell down there that's me, part of me, and I have this one up here, and the idea is to use my breath to bring them together, and I generate currents, and I can heal myself that way. Yes. All right. So if you can see where the pieces fit, if you didn't know what a Cathara grid was, good luck. How are you going to understand this stuff? Oh, you got this tube in there somewhere. Yeah, where? What does that tube do? Where does it go? What does it connect to? Who knows? Right? It's a tube. Yeah, has a capstone on it. Yeah, I mean, this is what some of the other teachings will tell you. It's connected to the Merkaba. Creates vortices. What is a Merkaba? It is a vehicle. Yes, it's also the natural circulatory system of the universe. They forget to mention this. Why? Because they're trying to create a perverted version of one that doesn't act like a natural one's supposed to. Anyway, we've got our Merkaba, we've got our crystal body, we've got our vector vortices, all inside and taking place within the Akabase shield that's in that big Akasha Merkaba, the big one that we're going to be activating as we progress through this. We actually started it already. It's doing pretty good from what I hear on the planetary level. The grids are still holding, but they won't if they don't do starburst. So anyway, that would be your density 4 body. Take that down 4 steps into a little tiny self. If you take the next step down, where it would run from this seal here and here, where this point and the next one down would be here and here, then there would be another smaller one inside that, another smaller one inside that. You'd be the little tiny one down here in density 1. That means you have these levels of your body in the other densities as well. What's really neat is when the pillar of power phases, your density parts actually come together and expand out again. When you inhale, your bodies are supposed to come together. And you exhale, the pillar expands out, and your densities separate. You're supposed to continually be in contact with your soul and your oversoul and your avatar. You're not supposed to be separated. You're supposed to be able to experience different places in space-time simultaneously, but you're not supposed to be completely cut off. When the problem with the crystal bodies took place that made it so the arcs got stuck at that 60 degrees, it seized the whole system. It was like putting a cog in, or literally putting a wrench in an engine where it couldn't move anymore. So literally the bodies were caught in an expansion state. So they're separated, so they can't interface and breathe with each other. So somewhere up there, out there, you feel like you might have a soul, and you can't remember because it's not with you anymore, but it actually is. It's stuck up there saying, I know I have a physical self down there somewhere. You know, you're separated when you're not supposed to be. That's where we get this type of mutated consciousness, where we really feel separated from source, separated from ourselves, separated from each other, and from our planet. This isn't a natural state. When we begin to get those arcs moving again, when we begin to get the pillar moving again, we begin to bring the ability to naturally breathe those huva body levels, those density body levels, in and out again. And that brings us into more and more continual natural communication with our own higher stations of consciousness. It won't happen overnight, but it's going to happen a lot faster when we're working with the core of the pillar of power. And again, it wouldn't be happening. They wouldn't be throwing all this at us this fast if it weren't important. And it is important. I think we're going to, I feel like there's a whole package of data that they're saving right for the end. They're not telling me either, but I feel it there. And I don't know what it is, but I'd say there's a bit of a solemn feel, but not a scary feel, but a serious feel, like on their part, like the emotion that I feel from them. It's serious information, but it's not scary. It's not negative or bad or anything like that. But it's kind of like, all right, team, this is the big show. And we have absolute faith in you. We know you can make it. And they want us to, not even because they need us to for themselves, but they know us as a part of themselves, and they love us, and they miss us. And they don't, after all the work that we as parts of themselves have put in to this healing project down here, they want us all to succeed very, very much. So there's, it's a serious note. I can wave of it really strong. I don't know if that's, there's one called AOD, by the way, AOD, because it's like this really long name with like one part begins with A, one begins with the whole one begins with D, and I couldn't even pronounce it. There's so many letters in it. He said, just call me AOD. Okay. Excuse me. So we have AOD. He's an Adonai. He's on the Adonai side. But this one feels like AOD. And AOD gives a lot of the more sophisticated information sometimes, and like it takes Ma'a and about 6 other people to step it down so I can reach it. But he's saying that very serious times are ahead, as far as it's almost like we got to play for a long time in amnesia on this planet, where we got to play, we're waking up light workers and like kind of be light, love, and clueless anyway, even though we're not going to be clueless, right? Yeah, but we're all going through that. I'm just waking up. Oh, am I here yet? Kind of feel. And they look at us differently. We might still look at ourselves as maybe once old-timers, but went back to being babes, and we're just kind of like coming out of the coma and starting to know who we are. But they look at us as masters. Oh, dear. Right? Talk about having high expectations. Oh, dear. Right? Yeah, like, what a tag team we've got down here. It's going to be interesting. But they really do. It's almost like they remember us more than we remember ourselves right now. They know that we have a huge amount of resources and knowledge and wisdom available with us that we forgot we had. So they look at us in one way as if, we're quite mature comrades of theirs. But we kind of still go, hi up there. I'm not supposed to ask for help, right? It is okay once in a while, though, right? But I can't pray to you or anything, right? Because you don't want to do the angel trip. Okay, right. Where they're looking at us as comrades. It's almost like, I can imagine it's like if you had if you had a friend that went into hospital for something and they gave him some kind of like drug for pain. And they come out and they're kind of like still your friend, and they're loopy as heck because they're really out there on the painkillers. Hi, how are you? A, B, C, D, F, G. And you're walking around with them going, I love you. I really do. Let's get you home where it's comfy for a while. I get a feeling sometimes that that's what it must be like for them because, they don't look at us like we know ourselves here, but they do understand that we feel clueless very often here. They do understand that we're doing the hard job in a lot of ways because they were the parts of ourselves that stayed there so they could stay conscious and lead this part back. So they respect us hugely. It would be nice if we could respect ourselves as hugely. We might move faster. But anyway, they're basically saying, it's been nice to walk you around the block to sober up and that kind of thing a bit. Right? Painkillers should be a bit out of your system by now. But by the way, you remember who you are yet? Because there's some serious work that needs to be done now. You've been doing very good asleep. Half asleep, even a third asleep on painkillers. You've been doing wonderfully. But it's time to really start to wake up and be counted. He just said, wake up and be counted amongst yourself, inside of yourself, to realize you have much more on the ball than you give yourself credit for, and that they need you to understand that. If they're going to help any of us down here, we've got to help ourselves, and one of the biggest things we need to do is get out of our own way as far as limited thinking about who we are, what our capacity is, what we're here for, how good, bad, awful, in between we might be. If you're here and you're listening to this, if you've been drawn to these teachings, these are Christian teachings, there's something in you to put you here. It doesn't matter what you did in Atlantis at this point. If you're still here and you can still hear this call and you can still work with these frequencies, that's telling you something right there. But they're asking us to kind of like put on a cloak of maturity a little bit. All right. Nope, won't call you boss. You're not boss. Nope, we're equals? Okay. Yes. To get a grip on the fact that we are Iani, we are Adonai. We are from elsewhere. We are in this world, but not of it. To get a grip on that and to remember what we did that for. Because the planet needs us now, and it's important now, if ever it was. Because now the frequencies are going to come in, and much stronger than they ever have, on both sides. And there's going to be a time when you need to draw on your knowing that you are Iani or equivalent. If you don't feel you're Iani, there's somebody up there on those levels that you came through to get here, that you left a part of yourself there. We need to find those parts of ourselves. There may be a time when it's difficult to get workshops together, when it's difficult for them to get transmissions through. And if they don't get transmissions through, I don't have anything new to teach. We can all do yoga together, but there's not. I can teach you some, basic, workout techniques. But as far as this information is downstep from the plates, and they're assisting in doing that because at this point it's the frequency is so high, and some of it's coming right from the Eka matrix, the parallel Eka matrix, not even on these plates. They'd have to make a new set of plates, which I think they're in the process of doing. And if things work out well here, there will be a time in the future where certain representatives of the races here will be gifted again with a new set of plates, but they will include the Adani records, which will be a first. All right. It's been a very protected system for a very long time because this has been a very troubled system for quite a long time. So anyway, we'll get back onto this. Let me move through this. I just get off on tangents. They're all related, though. That's that one. Oh, that's just a touch and base on the shields. All of these diagrams are either in the Phoenix part of the Cathara manual or in micro version in the California one. But again, this is why we're putting the two together, so you will have any of these. I'm not going to spend much time on these because they're old material. They're from, you know, the early K23 stuff. I just want to keep the visual sequence going, okay? We're on shields there. It showed the shields, have the detail on the shields. This one is one of those micro versions again. It just shows this process. This process is a riot. It's basically, and I remember thinking, what came before that? I know something happened before that spark released out of the center of the shields. Spark releases from the center of the shields. It takes the imprint from the shields. The shields have all these little tiny Cathara grid templates, right? They're vector templates. Each shield has a set of 12 of them that go with each of the shield nodes. So a pulse of frequency comes out one of the shield node lines, one of the lines of fire letters that moves to the shield to the end of the node, passes through one of these, and it actually creates a projection, a vortice. It's like a pulse that moves through and creates a rippling pulse of energy that holds the imprint of what that program is, which is, it happens to be a Cathara grid in the shield, and projects it outward toward the Lodi lines that are on the outside, out here, the external Lodi lines. So this is happening inside here, and these vortices project out to the edges of the shield and then go into bonding with a set of 3. Each one bonds with a set of 3 Lodi lines, takes a replica of those currents, blends it together, sends a back pulse in to the shields, and all sorts of wild stuff actually starts to happen once that happens. You can look at that as an exhale from this level, okay? Where there's an exhale of a spark of Shalaya current, Shalaya 45 current, from the center seed atoms, density seed atoms in the center of the shields, that goes out. Each one of these has 12 nodes, and it has 12 fire letter lines that leads to the nodes, and each has an imprint, a mathematical imprint of the Cathara. So it projects it out into the Lodi lines, and it creates, this was a rough version, we've got a better version of the drawings of these now, and we've got, I think it might be the next one even, we're close, another 2 graphs. It's one right after this. So this process creates this, by the way, if you're looking at it flat. Now this is a flat view, as if you took this, cut it down the back, and flattened it out this way, so you could see how many of what there were. And basically what you get are 60 little Cathara grids. They were from the 5 shields, each with 12 of these templates that projected into vector vortices that became 3-dimensional upright vertical things that interfaced with the Lodi lines and began to blend sets of 3 currents from the Lodi lines. This is the place where, or the apparatus through which, the meridian and the axiotonal lines are simultaneously created. The axiotonal lines are the, and this gets interesting because this is where the eros and the ethos starts to happen. But it's actually started way before that. It had to do with that spark that came out. All right, the Shalaya spark itself is an etheric atomic spark, which means it's part Le'adore. And when that gets polarized and synthesized through these vector projection planes, the part of it that gets polarized back into ethos and eros, which are etheric currents. All right, so you end up with the ethos lines, the positive charge lines, as the meridians, and they run this small series here. I didn't even put them in on this because there's a tiny version and a bigger version right after this. So these little tiny things here would be connected to lines. I don't even have them in here. These that run this way would be the ethos lines, which are the meridian lines, and the eros lines are the axiotonal lines. So the eros energy is the female frequency. You would say it is the Le'adore, is the female of the Le'adore, and the ethos would be the male of the Le'adore, the male of the female, and the female of the female. Okay, they're both etheric. Now they blend with other things to become other things, and that's when it gets totally insane. That's where you get radius and natus and all sorts of things. Now these lines form something called a teleosphere. This thing, when you look at it flat, is called a telea refraction screen, because it's through this that this isn't the place where currents are made. The currents are actually made, the sparks are generated in the central column that's actually right at the center, way at the center of here. So that's where the spark pulse currents are manufactured. Then, in various ways, not just through here, but one of the ways is through the Shalaya sparks that come out. They get sent outward into the outer field, and that's where they start to cycle. So this is like a giant mix master, where it starts to blend and bend and refract currents back and forth. So they interface at different angles, creating different types of radiation units bumping up against each other, which creates different types of bonds and different types of sparks. This is where one or two types of currents start to become many types of currents. This is where the Lettori currents from the external Lodi lines that are from the Lettori side start to blend with the primarily Shalaya etheric currents that come out in the Shalaya sparks. So this is where you start going from, you have etheric here and you have atomic currents here, you start to blend them. They're actually not even atomic yet over here. They're part Shalaya as well. So you have etheric atomic, etheric atomic, and etheric, which would be the Shalaya spark that's not as high. It's reduced a bit from the ones from the Lodi lines, which came out first. So you have these currents meeting these currents, and they separate to create the ethos and the eros, which are fully etheric currents. And then the back pulse current, it is a Shalaya current, but there's this thing called recessives and dominants. This is where it's enough to get you absolutely really dyslexic. But where you could have a female flame that is actually androgynous. It can do either. It's tripolar flames. All of them can do male, female, or neither or both, basically. But in order to be able to retain the ability to spark, they have to have at least a recessive of what the original polarity would be. If they're just completely neutral, they can't spark. They're stationary, standing wave units that don't move. So they all will hold either a recessive or a dominant. So you'll have a neutral with a female recessive that will give you still a female charge when in contact with its opposite, which would be a neutral 45, say, charge Shalaya unit, but has a recessive male or positive charge. You put those two together and they are capable of sparking, even though they have the neutral current in between them. So there's a lot of detail that it's enough to make me want to quit, actually. Surrender and say, please beam somebody down that's better at this. Because this stuff gets really, really hard to translate when you're getting, the reversals that come through the planetary grids, and it's all laying on your kitchen table and 50 million pieces are going, all right, which ones are the right ones and which ones were coming through, and the currents were flipping them as they came through. Yeah. So there's a lot of data to this. What's most important is if we can get the concept that this thing called the teliosphere, which when you look at it flat, shows you precise alignments. All these little things in the center, each one of these are a telia projection plane, which were created from these imprints, which were the templates and the shields for them. They became the vortices that came out to meet the Lodi lines, that began to blend energy from the Lodi lines with the spark energy that came out from the center, and to polarize it. So each of those at its center has a node, right? Each one of those vortices came out from the center, picked up the imprint, stood up vertically, which means it came out like this, part above and part below the shield, right? Came out like that. That way. Right? So you've got those, they intersect with these, and they form this, and this gets really neat when you see what it looks like dimensionally. This was a quick one because there was just no time to draw the thing out, to try to, it's still not perfect, the drawing it isn't. You could do it much more perfect on a computer, but I couldn't. And I dread the 6 years it will take me to even learn to do graphics on a computer. I don't have time, so I've done it by hand, but it's enough to show what this looks like when it's actually in the spherical form that it takes, because this becomes a sphere. It interacts with these. They actually take on different planes, and they form a spherical shape within the structure of the Lodi lines. And we can, I think, go to the next one. Is that the one that shows it better yet? Is it? That's not the one yet either. No, this describes it a little bit better. See, this explains the shield way back there. Right, sends a pulse out. It intersects here with the 3 Lodi lines, draws in frequency from the 3 Lodi lines, blends it. And there's all sorts of blending that takes place between these little tiny, except they're not tiny. You think tiny because you think, okay, this is like, these are little teliospheres, except these are massive light cells that our universe lives inside of. All right, so your body has these too. These are massive light cells. So think big teliospheres, big vortices. It's very easy to think of them in terms of little tiny ones, because compared to big catharogrids, they are. Gives you an idea proportionately, like we're like the size of an atom in the middle of all this. But that's all right. Anyway, you get your vortice coming out, your vector projection vortice. You have 60 of them coming out because you have 5 shields. One of them, the ethos shield. They didn't even get into the eros yet because the ethos phases first before the eros from parallel gets involved. And it gets really complicated tonight. It probably won't be once it's out. It was just complicated translating it. But it's helpful to understand that you have this teliosphere. It's a refraction screen when you look at it this way. Technically, it's a lens because it is a spherical form. So it is like a sphere that works as a lens that bends and refracts light. Yeah, this one shows it a little bit better. Yeah. And again, there are the axiom lines and the meridian lines. This shows it a little better. This is one of the new diagrams. Shows that again, which is how the spark projects out and it picks up the imprint and it makes a vector vortice. But what happens, this is happening in 5 shields on 12 projection lines all at the same time. Right? So they fire all at the same time, which means you have all of these vortices going boom all at the same time, which creates a sphere that expands out from the center as these vortices come out toward the grid of the Lodi lines that are around it. That creates basically this down here, which is what we call, this is the drawing that represents the teliosphere. There we go. That is a basic teliosphere. Now this particular one is anchored at D13.5, top and bottom, which means you have other dimensions happening in here, like your Cathara grid. If you looked at your Cathara grid, you'd have D12 here, D1 here, then down below D1, it's actually parallel D13. All right, this is D13.5 because the etherics run the 0.5 and they set the template for the not 0.5 right below it. So D13.5 is actually the template, the etheric template for the D13 monad field, all right, the blue light field. All right, these work down from there. You have a teliosphere that runs D13.5 to D13.5 all the way around. The frequencies start to polarize. If you look at the Cathara grid, once you come down, you'd have D12, but down here you wouldn't have another D12. You'd have D1, technically, in the PCM Cathara grid. Now, if we get into the other ones that are upside down here, it gets even more fun, but I won't go there yet. If we can understand that flat grid is actually one way of viewing what is actually a sphere that forms within this Lodi line set, that is the external Lodi line set from the original projections of the Lodi lines when the rod and staff and all that stuff originally happened way back in stage whatever it was. There's so many stages and phases of stages, I can't even remember them, and I'm not going to try. But fortunately, when it comes through, I do write it down, so it's there if you want to look it up. It's in your materials. So if we can understand that is a way to look at, to track really, the axiom lines, because the axiom lines are the ones that form on these. If you look at these up close, I think I'll put this one up a little bit more, just in case there's some people that were confused. I know a lot of you get this, but there's a couple people I think that would benefit a bit from understanding it a little bit better, and I haven't explained it as much as I'd like to. Before either, there we go. Let's try this. Just to look at these lines one more time. How these form. I've changed the numbers, by the way, where these used to be E numbers. Remember for ethos? Yeah, once they explained that we have ethos and eros, two E's, yes, and one forms axiom lines and one forms meridian lines. Aha, A's and M's. There we go. So I've changed the E ones. The A's were always A's for axiom lines, but they hadn't talked to us too much about meridians and those kind of things. That was later transmission. So we've updated the graphs to include that information. So now you have, and also the wording, which is really interesting to get eros in there. You know, when they first only started talking about the ethos electricals and the PCM density currents, the axiom lines actually become the density currents, even though they start out as etheric eros. They blend with other things, where the ethos lines, what are the M lines here, the meridian lines, they are also etheric, but they become the full etheric body template ones. So these things downstep. The axiotonal lines that are running on these grids here, they run, the solid lines are the axiotonals. They run this way. And look, they run in between these. This is the offsets of the shields. If you notice, they're not lined up one on top of another. The bottom of this cathara grid actually sinks down in to the space between the other two on the density level down. This is interesting because right here, what is created are called transfiguration points. That's where you have the signet, two signets or cathara centers from the cathara grid here and here on that one density level that intersect with the third one from the density level down. These are transfiguration points of energy, and they're all over the place. I forget how many there are. I think there's 96 of them in the whole grid. Now, when you put that grid on a sphere, it means a sphere that has all these points where these are points where frequency from the outer crystal body moves down through into the inner layers, to become the inner layers of the crystal body, back to the centers of the shields, and expands and contracts out again. The transfiguration points run between the shields. If this is the line for the density 4 shield, this is the center line for the density 3 shield, and you can tell because that's where the nodes are. All right, those numbers are the node numbers. So these are the shields with their nodes on them. These are the vector projection planes, each one of them half above, half below. And then right in between those two is where you have these transfiguration points coming in. They form there, and they form between these, and they form between these, and they form between these. Now, these become key in a process that's rather mind-boggling of how the crystal body structure itself forms. Because we've seen the crystal body line grid, light line grid, but that's not the whole structure of it. The crystal body is a radiation matrix, a set of embedded radiation matrices, 3 different types. One called a myonic crystal, one called a dionic crystal, and one called an ionic crystal. I was like, oh, you're kidding me. No, that's what it's called. That's why we call ourselves ioni. Oh, so that's a little bit, and the new stuff that we're going to get into. But if you don't get where these things fit, when you look at this diagram, if you don't understand some of what it means, you're going to be lost when you get to the more sophisticated stuff. That's why I wanted to touch base on this. Remember, this is a flat view, just like you take a map of a globe and you flatten it out so you can see how to get from California to New Mexico or something. Well, you can flatten this out to see where your lines run, what nodes they run through. There are 12 nodes in each shield. These are the alignments of those nodes as per the axis alignments of the shields, which was given in the chart that was on the shield. It showed you what the natural axis alignments are. It gets all really wacky when those alignments are off, and that's part of the problem on this planet because of the crystal bodies being misaligned. The shields are all askew, and they're not sending, they're actually connecting wrong lines with each other. They're connecting half axiotonals with half meridians and forming a hybrid line that of frequency that isn't natural at all, and it's literally a mutated atomic current that is finite in life, and it deteriorates, it decays, it doesn't spark, and it's what's holding the mutation into our bodies and into the planetary body. But if we can understand, basically we have the meridian lines. These are the dotted ones because they're electrical. They run between the projection planes that form the axiotonal lines, and they run from these. Now, the meridian lines are electrical, ethos, electrical etheric. They run from negative nodes. So negative nodes run positive lines. They transmit positive lines, and vice versa. You have a positive node, it'll transmit a negative line. The nodes in density shields 4, 2, and ethos are primarily positive nodes, even though nodes, which are composed of a diode and a myode, they will have a recessive or a dominant in order to be able to interact in the crystal body the way that they do. So you have primary male nodes on density 4, or male meaning electrical, density 4, density 2, and density 4, density 2, and ethos, density 4, and density 1 and 3, you have negative nodes, which would be that symbol there. Right? I just didn't want to hide all the numbers by putting them all in. Now, that determines which lines, once those lines polarize into axiom and meridian lines, once they blend and then split into the axiom and meridian lines, the node determines which currents it will run. The electricals will run with the negative nodes, so they will come out. The negative nodes are here. These guys will be transmitting the electricals. They run between the ones that transmit magnetics. So there's this alignment that occurs. When you put this on a sphere, you end up with these lines, they're like this, arcing to the poles, the tops and the bottoms of poles. And what they're arcing toward are the D13.5 seals that are held in the Eka base shield. And it is because of the arcing of these lines that a sphere is formed. It would have been a tube of lines spinning with the shields, but it becomes a ball of lines spinning with the shields, and it bends the Taliya vortices into a spherical shape as it's going. That's where we get to the, with the next one, where we see the Taliya sphere. Coffee, though? That was an hour? I didn't feel like an hour. Not quite. Okay, well, I don't want the tea to go cold, but I do want to get through Taliyas anyway. Taliya spheres are key. See, that's that grid again, which would have been just straight vertical lines if there hadn't been an arcing to the poles where you have D13 seals, D13.5 seals. You also have the D14. It's actually parallel. D14 seals as well, that the Lodi lines in forming the crystal light grid arced to. And it's the D14 seals that the Merkaba fields are actually connected to. So there's this whole series of going up into the primal light fields of seals, which are frequency patterns of scalar standing waves that are in the grids that were part of the templates when they were set, that were activated when the monadic beam came in and set all the other things that have little sparks of radiation in them, that hold together the entire structure of the crystal body on different levels. So you have your seals at 14 that hold the Lodi lines together, and you have your seals at 13.5 that hold the first Taliya sphere together. Now the Taliya sphere is literally like a little powerhouse. It's taking energy in units, and it's not just like grabbing those lines and bending them in. It's taking units of energy from these. If you can imagine one current of, say, electrons and one of protons with the opposite charge moving past each other, they don't just like blah. They these will still go this way, this will still go this way, but units will come off each and come together because of the polar attractions to them. So what they're doing is they're taking units of radiation off. The Taliyas draw in units of radiation from the units of radiation that are moving in the Lodi lines. And from those units of radiation, they polarize them. First they blend them together, then they polarize them. They send the ethos and the eros ones into the vertical transmission lines in the shields that form the axiom and the meridian lines. They send a back pulse into the sphere, back toward the center of the sphere that does other things. And outside, the lines arc to the seals at D13.5, and it pulls the whole thing into a spherical form. This is all rotating with the shields, so it forms literally a ball of frequency that is called a Taliya sphere, and it has 60 Taliya projection planes on it. Those projection planes are like mix masters, where they take and blend frequency and bend it at very specific angles. These are actually at specific angles that have to do with the angles of the Lodi lines that they were drawing frequency from. So there are specific angles, and it gives it between that and the pull of tension that the lines are experiencing by being pulled toward the poles, gives it the spherical form. There's all sorts of neat stuff that takes place in here. This diagram over here, if you can see, is that too low for you guys back there? Okay. This one back here, this simply shows you that this is forming. They're actually in the same place in space, right? They're forming in the same space. They're just different structures that are forming because of the interaction between the frequencies that they both carry. The Taliya sphere forms in the same place as the Lodi lines, and they are both, even though the Lodi lines arc up higher into parallel 14, these go up to parallel 13, or yeah, it is parallel 13.5. So the Lodi sphere is a little bit shorter as far as its seals are one down. What gets interesting is you end up with 5 of these embedded in each other, and that wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't just these. But wait till you see what happens to one of these. You have, do we have that? Is that one the next? Because I might break there. I'll let them just see it for a minute. If it's it's one of the new ones that I wanted to get to. I'll put that one on later. I just want to show them. Yeah, we'll put these on later. Yeah. I just want to. I want to give you an idea of what after we have the coffee break, so it doesn't go cold while it's sitting there. What we're going to go into. This is one telea, okay? This is just one. We're just talking about the D13 teleosphere now, right? Well, there's the teleosphere. We already got that far in the last diagram. This is the teleosphere showing its transfiguration points, right? Those points where the single ball from the top one, the single signet from the top or the bottom, meets with the two. It's hard to see with the circles on, but it's the point where that signet would meet with the other two from the two above it, or the same going down below. So these are the points, transfiguration points. They become key later. This is showing that each one of these telea vector projection planes has a lotus arc set, which means it phases, which means it expands and contracts. It means they all expand and contract simultaneously and in sequence when we're supposed to expand and contract in synchronization with each other. That means the sphere expands and contracts. It means it breathes. It circulates energy in and out. All right? Now, that gets even more interesting. I didn't, the one I'm trying to draw that I just didn't have time to keep fighting with it, was each of these is also a light cell, because the spinning of the node, which is the seed atom for each of those little teleas, the node serves as the seed atom for each of those little teleas, forms a sphere, like a radial body sphere around each of them, a tiny teleosphere around each of them. And I'm afraid to even ask, but I think I know that, yes, each of those has a million of those little vortices too, probably. One of the, like all these little telea planes, I would imagine each one of those has them too. So you're getting refraction and bending of light and sound all over the place here. This is still just one of these, and there's 5 of these plus 5 huvas and dimensional ones that each have their own level. Like, oh my God. But the one I didn't get to draw, that someday I will, just because I'm going to conquer how those balls cluster. I am. I'm working on the clustering of those balls for ages. There is a particular way that when each of these, and see, I'd have to go back and do this one as perfect as possible, where I have all the measurements exactly perfect. To get it even this far, you have to first get the line sets in the right place. And remember, they're offset, so they have to be, the electricals have to be in a specific place. So you have to take this grid, pull the spheres off that, take the spheres, then pull these off and put them in perfect alignment on the spheres, getting the right angle of arc, right? All this stuff that I really don't enjoy as an artist at all. Once you get all that done, and some people would be really good at this. People that are mathematically and computer-oriented would be much better at this than me. But to be able to get it, the grid perfect there, then you could plug in the spheres and know that, like, you have the Cathara grid there, half the sphere would be on the front, half would be on the back. And these are at specific angles. This one may be, I think it's like 22.5, 45, something like that. I'd have to go back to the other chart to remember my angles on this, because it follows the angles, basically, of the Lodi line, crystal body, light grid. So once you got all that information plugged in, then you could know exactly where to put your spheres to see. You had this thing that looks like a raspberry. The closest I could get is it looks like a cosmic raspberry, where it does. I'm still trying to get how exactly they cluster up here, where it doesn't give the flat top raspberry effect, because I'm still working on it. So I don't have that one in here anywhere. But this one step more onto this would show you this as this grid, where it's showing the circles around each one, which are spheres around each one. So each of these would have a sphere as well around it, all of them. And again, the spheres expand and contract because they have the lotus arcs inside that are moving back and forth. And that means it's moving energy back and forth through, every time it expands and contracts, it moves energy back and forth through the transfiguration points. That's easy enough. Then we get over to, what are those axiom and meridian lines doing anyway? This is where, I just want to show you something really quick, because this one drove me insane for a long time. What flows in what direction? What spins in what direction? What polarity does it have? It was hard. It was easy enough to get these. Okay, I can take my sphere. I know that I've the arc to the poles, so I know I have my lines running now as spheres. So here would be my electrical ones, which I don't have shown up here. Here would be my magnetic ones, and there would be both together. That was simple enough. We also know from a ways back that the magnetics are supposed to run from the bottom to the top, and the electricals from the top to the bottom, when you think of the Merkaba spirals. You know, okay. That wasn't too bad. Then we got into things like the erosphere, which is the one that runs the magnetics. The axiotonal line grid sphere is called the erosphere because it runs eros frequency, which happens to be negative 11 2/3 counterclockwise Eros-etheric currents, and they flow upward from the bottom and circulate through the interior staff as well. So there's an interior staff that's happening here as well. This is where some of it is going up this way. Other parts of it are going in, but they're not just going straight forward in, because the stuff is supposed to go from the bottom up. How does it get from the bottom up all the time? It's got to get back down. What goes up has to come down someplace. That means magnetics have to come down somewhere. They change into something else. But first, before it changes into anything else, just the fact that this is a spinning sphere with its magnetic Eros frequencies going upward and it's spinning, it creates a deflection field in the shield around it, which is like an opposite spin field of frequency as it spins through. As it's spinning, it is creating a backflow current, which happens to be something called magnos. And it creates a magnosphere, which is a sphere around it that goes in the opposite direction. So it creates a sphere of magnos that is from the axiotonal line sphere, which is the Erosphere, but the magnosphere goes 11 2/3 clockwise and it has a positive charge. There we go. And of course, the opposite's happening with the electrical one. So we've got magnos that comes off as the step down of the Erosphere, and we have electros, which is the step down from the electrical meridian sphere. And then there's one more. I'm going to leave you at that one, because this one it'll start to, it'll get your, where's the one with the little flames? No, I'll get back to that one later too. Oh, I wanted to show them that. I put that way back there, didn't I? I'll just show you one more. I'm going to jump out of sequence just before, because I just want to show you a shape. Yes, I want to show them a shape. I'll come back to all the crystal body stuff later. It'll take me forever. But, where's the one? There. The one I just got done with this morning that drove me mad. If I can remember where that goes. Yeah, so we need to put that back. You remember? Talked about the silver sanctum? The Eros capsule. All right? Yeah. This happens to be the nadial capsule. This is the nadial lines. So the currents go up. Some of them split and go, they split, go down the center into the zendradon, then they flow back up as axiotonal lines on the inside. And the other part that splits off forms this. They come in, this is where the radon cells come in. At 12.5 up here, the magnetics come up, enter the electrical zendradon cell at 12.5, split. Now each of them are splitting, so it's not just two lines coming down. You have a set of 12 lines coming down. These lines, though, aren't the Eros. These were the Eros out here. They formed the magnos, remember? The stuff that has the opposite charge and spin, but the same number, 11 2/3, but it's clockwise and positive. That's what flows down the natus lines. So the natus lines are actually positive, but they're formed by these. This was driving me bananas just trying to translate this. So I just wanted to show you to think about that a little bit. So this is where your flame body shapes are coming from the nadial lines, and you have an upside down one that's formed by the other, because the electricals flow the other way, right? That forms what are called the radius lines and your radionic capsule. And they're each, now this is still one teleosphere level, okay? There are all those 5 of them, and then there's the density level ones. Yeah, they each have a level of these, a set of all of these. What's neat, too, is you'll notice here, from those of you who've taken the dance floor programs, you'll remember the yin and the yang flow, all right? The male and the female, the magnetic flow. This is the yin flow, counterclockwise, comes up from the bottom, stays counterclockwise, goes back down, right? The yang flow comes down from the top clockwise, stays clockwise, and then goes back out, all right? Then there's these other areas that form that we'll get into later, because there's a bunch of crystal body stuff I wanted to show you before I got to this. But I just wanted to show you that this is where the structure, the Akasha shape, is coming from. The nadial lines are forming it. It takes on this shape for 2 reasons. One, because of this particular alignment of cells that are the radon cells, where they begin the process of stepping down. But we're going to backtrack, and I'm going to show you something when we get back from break, of the crystal body structure itself. This is what begins the process of a little bit of squeeze and push here and there that makes what's a sphere on the outside become more that shape of the Akasha shape on the inside. Because there are 2 different shaped crystals inside of the third. And that was really neat. That was a discovery. So we'll show you that, the crystal body structure of the myode, the myonic crystal, the dionic crystal, and the meiotic and biotic crystal grids when we get back from break. Okay, enjoy your break. Hello. This okay? Is this on? It's got a little red light that says battery. Is that all right? The red light's all right? That's okay. Not batteries. Cool. Gee, I was getting used to the echo. I don't hear the echo now. That's good. Yeah. I hope you all enjoyed your break. I enjoyed my pot and a half of coffee. I'm not joking. If I talk a little fast, it's the caffeine. But at least it should keep me on my feet until midnight. So, anyway, there's lots more to come. We left off with a little sneak preview at how the things that in Cathar 2.3 we left off as flat screens that we indicated were actually spheres but didn't quite illustrate, that are now illustrated as spheres, that we have the ethosphere, the erosphere, and together they actually create what is called the lotosphere. So you have ethos, eros, lotos. Now these are each different currents. All right. The lotos is a combination of the ethos and the eros, and it's a 45 charge current, where the ethos is a 33 1/3 positive clockwise current, and the eros is an 11 2/3 counterclockwise negative current. Now, I jumped ahead before because I was excited about showing you where the flame body shapes come from. But there's this thing that happens in between these. There's something that happens more outside first before the inside stuff. It's actually pretty simultaneous, but to understand the shape of the akasha that comes, it helps to understand the crystal bodies that form. So we put those first. So they're actually, I jumped over those knowing that we'd come back to those. As far as another group of graphs that were enough to put me away for a few centuries were the crystal body graphs, because there are 3 different shaped crystals that are embedded within each other. Some form on the nodes that are positive, some form on the nodes that are negative, and then a set forms on like cross lines between the 2 of them. So you have 3 different crystals. And the crystals are literal structures in energy. They're etheric crystals, and they form the structures that progressively work down into etheric atomic and then atomic etheric, working your way down toward matter from the outer etheric levels of the crystal body structure. What's interesting is this particular graph is it's a plotting graph, so you can actually trace what lines, what nodes go where. That's the only way you can really know what's supposed to be where in the first place. And it's the only system that's actually showing you that there is a supposed to be. There is a divine blueprint that says, yes, on the density 4 shield, the 6 is supposed to be in the middle. All right, the 6th node is in the middle. That has a specific coding that holds what will become the D6 coding. So each of the shields have nodes that are very specifically coded to the dimensional bands, to the 12-dimensional bands when you get into density. And in the center, you run the D13, 14, and 15. When we get through this evening, we get to the point, and this ought to be right because there's tons of stuff in between here and there. When we get to the Rishate spiral, it's actually the etheric atomic level equivalent of what we learned about the rainbow ray a long time ago, and some of you might remember, some of you might not have even heard it as referred to that, because it's been a while since we talked about the Kira-ray and the Kunda-ray, which are the 15 ray currents that come in from the Laetore level on the Eka, and they become the density currents down here, the 15 rays. And these are the etheric equivalent that come from up higher, that actually plug into and form those currents that we're going to get into when we talk about the Rushate spiral. So we got the Kunda-ray, the Kira-ray, and the Rushate. And there's also the Shalaya and stuff, which they're not getting into yet, thank God. And I'm sure that probably goes in the opposite direction of everything, and it's enough to tie my mind in knots. It gets really nuts after a while when you're trying to plot all of these things. Like, wait a minute, what direction did Magnos go in? And what direction did Lodos go in? And then you take it down a few more steps, and you have photos to deal with, and you have, there's photos, photes, and something else. I mean, they're just showing us where these currents begin. They haven't taken us all the way down. I think that's a book unto itself, because they all interact at different angles. The interesting thing about these things that are sparks that start to accrete together to become currents that flow in certain directions toward their opposite pole, usually. All right. So now there's also interactions that happen between things that are Laetore-based and things that are Laetore-based, because they would still be a recessive opposite pole even if they have the same charge here. So there's a whole bunch of really intense breakdowns on how these currents work. The most important thing to understand about the currents is they start out as sparks, little spark radiation units that form as a product of phasing. At the top in the shield levels, in the Eka base shield, you have partakai units, partakai, partakai, and particum. You have partakai that break down into partakai and particum, and they phase and they make sparks. Well, then you have, there's this whole other set of charts that aren't down yet, but I've seen them. I cringe, that where you have that level, then those sparks are called something else. They didn't give me the something else yet. And then they phase with the etherics, and they form partikites, sparks, and then the partikites phase with each other, and they form particates and antiparticates, and it comes all the way down. Somewhere in there you have kilana that phase and form kilans, and then the kilans accrete and build up. And this is what gets interesting, is where you have all these sparks that start to accrete together to form moving sets of sparks, which become currents, pulsing currents of radiation units. Then they start to interact with each other at specific angles, where if you think in terms of even very elementary level molecular biology stuff, where you see how molecules come together, where atoms start to come together to form molecules, and they have all sorts of different shapes of what plugs into what. You know, what part of what atom will plug into another to form X molecule or Y molecule. It's like that, where you have these sparks that start to accrete to form spark clusters. Those spark clusters become fire letters and fire letter sequences, and that's what the DNA and everything is built on. But in between there, they have kilana sparks, which are little clusters of different types of sparks. And you can have kilana made of, I believe you could have kilana made of partikites, particates, partikai, I mean, all of them. Kilana would be the beginning phase of, say, atoms coming together, but they're not atoms yet. They're up there in the etheric levels, where they come together and start to form clusters. And then at that point, those clusters interact electromagnetically with other things around them and draw to them certain things. And they start to form geometrical shapes coming from three different angles, so they form three-dimensional planes, and they start to form crystallizations. So you start to form Keelan crystals, which are little radiation matrices that form together, and again, they cluster, and a lot of the clustering has to do with the mathematical coding that's set in the shield to begin with, in the CRIS code, where it determines what angles things are going to interface at, which will determine how they cluster, therefore what shape they will cluster into. And once they cluster into chelons, what types of chelons will be drawn to what other types of chelons that will form larger geometrical shapes that actually will flesh out the structure of taking energy and consciousness and literally fleshing it out to become structure. And it's the structure, is the blueprint behind what, once some of those currents, when they're stepped down even further to where they go from etheric to atomic etheric to atomic, where the atoms cling to the invisible part of the etheric atoms that you don't see. But they're not called atoms at the etheric level. That's where you have partikites and particates, or in the etheric levels. So there's this whole building of structure. I think science right now, I used to try to keep up with whatever they're writing in the journals, but at this point I can't even keep up with breakfast. You know, I mean, this has been intense. This has not stopped since the Phoenix workshop, since about 3 weeks before. This has been just one ongoing thing. So I can't keep up with everything, but last I heard, science was still into, like, you know, quarks are the, you know, elementary particles and that kind of thing. And behind all those quarks, you have all of these other levels of particle and wave units, and units that are capable of being particles or waves or both. They transfigure between both. They switch from being particles to waves to particles, back and forth again. What's kind of neat is when we get to the end and we see how all these things, this is where we're going to get into crystal structure, where we see that this grid not only can show us where the spheres form. Now, there's our Cathara grid. The Cathara grid plugs into this, because remember, this shape here, this is a map of the shields laid out flat. So it's the shield nodes, 12 nodes in each of the 5 shields. Well, that implies the Cathara grid fits in there someplace, because those 5 shields run through the Cathara grid. This is how the Cathara grid fits in here. You can see it probably better when you look, you know, close. I mean, I had to, when I do these, I'm surprised I'm not a hunchback, because I'm literally like bent over them with my eyeballs a half inch away from the paper sometimes trying to plot these, because it's so tight. You know, it's a specific point that is like the D13 point, a specific point that is the D12 point. If you look at the it's not on this page, but the diagrams that show the Cathara grid with the shields running through it, you'll see that the density 4 shield has K12 in the top. So that's where you know this is the density 4 shield. So K12 would be in the center of that, and it would be there. So up above that, you'd have 13 and then 13.5. There's also a 12.5 point that becomes significant in there with the radon cells. So these are like, there's a whole bunch of things that take it up into the primal light fields here and take it down into the primal light fields this way as well. But this graph becomes very, very useful because you can plot everything on it, not just the shape of the spheres or where they are. See, the shape of the spheres, what it means is these lines where you take, say, axiotonal 6, that's the one that runs down on the magnetics here, right? That one is here. All right, this one would be the one that runs this way. And again, it's hard to see it on these because they're not color, but they're a little easier, I think, to see on the ones you look at there. So each one of these lines is this one, right? The next one bent, right? So this is the same as there. So you can plug each one of these in. So you can know what each one of those lines are. You can know what axiotonal it is. You can know what meridian line for the electricals from this grid. But you can also, because you know these placements, you can also begin to track the shape of the crystals that form. Now, the crystals that form in and around the spheres. Now, again, those spheres are formed by the lines, the polarized ethos and eros lines, the axiom or the axiotonal and the meridian lines, arcing to the poles of the D13.5 seals, forming the spheres, and they're actually all in one place, and they're actually embedded in the teleosphere. Right? So you've got all that going on. There's an interaction that takes place between the currents that these generate. Remember, these are spinning, and they each generate a backflow current where you have the ethosphere that is 33 1/3 clockwise positive that generates a backflow or a deflection field that is a 33 1/3 counterclockwise negative, and that's called electros. So it's a different current. It's born of this current, but it's a different current. It has different properties. It has the opposite polarity of the original one. This one does the same thing, except it creates magnos. This was counterclockwise negative 11 2/3. It ends up creating magnos, which is clockwise positive 11 2/3. These currents start interacting with each other and with the ones that birth them, because they're all actually in the same place, spinning, counter-rotating. And they begin to create where, again, units from each of the lines begin to attract toward each other. And you also have, outside of this, that Lodi line grid that's made of the Ettore frequencies. So there starts to become an interaction that takes place between them as well. There's interactions that take place between the nodes in each of the shield lines, and that's what holds the secret to the shapes of the crystals that form that what is your meiotic grid? What is your dyadic grid? The meiotic grid would be the grid that is built upon the crystals that are, not the crystals, the nodes that carry negative charge, okay? The myodes. They actually are outgoing. They take energy out. And the dyadic grid is built upon the nodes that are positive. Now, again, all nodes carry a negative and a positive, but one is recessive. So it means it still has a dominant charge. Right, and it has the still point node in the middle, the still point, lowest point of movement between two waves, between the two polarity waves. Now, we have the density 1 and 3 shields are the dominant negative nodes. So these guys would form an interrelationship of lines. They actually act as, you could compare them to cathodes. In electrical terms, I believe cathodes draw in positive. They are negative. They emit negative charged units, and they draw in positive charged units. All right. So you would have these negative myodes drawing in positive units, both from the ethos and from the magnos, because they're positive charge units. So it would start drawing them in, doing something with them. It would start transmitting them between its own like kinds, and it forms a particular type, which I'll show you in a minute, a particular type of grid that will form as far as transmission lines. There would be the opposite pole transmission lines as far as they're not transmission, they're what the node's actually drawing in, but what they consider the grid, the meiotic grid, would be the grid that is formed by the lines that the same polarity as the node that are being transmitted by the node. So if it's a negative node, it has its negative emissions line, and it's those emissions lines that form a grid of units of radiation. It forms a radiation matrix. You can look at it flat and see where they are, and then you can put it together just like you can put the sphere in there, like take that and show where that would fit on the sphere. And you can find the crystal body shapes that go with the meiotic and the dyadic grid. One thing interesting before we look at what they look like is just looking at the fact that we have 2 out of the 5 shields have negative nodes and 3 have positive nodes. That alone implies there's going to be a difference in shape between the 2 crystals. And trying to decipher this was a riot, because I was getting pictures of them. Where does what fit? What's that connected to? Like, wait a minute, where's my microvision? Trying to see, because I'll get them in images sometimes. And I'll get images without words, sometimes for weeks. It'll be before the words come. And it's really funny, because I'm not sure what that is. It's really neat, and I know it's important, but I have no idea what it is. These were like that. They were starting to plot the crystal body things on here. And I get it, and I go, that doesn't feel right. There's something wrong with that side, that kind of thing. So these were an evolutionary process of translation that we finally got down to where they're close enough to show what they look like. Then I was trying to redo them because I realized that I didn't do it perfectionistic enough. I hate measuring. I really do. And I'm not too bad by eye. I used to be able to do portraits and stuff, so I'm pretty close by eye, but not, I'm not a draftsman. And I should have paid attention to numbers, because I realized I was going to have to do the whole thing over to get it absolutely the way it should be, when I realized that there were straight lines that had to line up inside of these little triangle-shaped things that form. So there's somewhere on the kitchen table. There's the one that's in its process of becoming perfect. But these are close enough to show you, illustrate the concept. The artwork could be done better, but it's not too bad. Let's see. I'm going to go to the... I don't think I need that one yet. Just keep those 2 aside. I'm going to put those somewhere in this, but not there yet. Yeah, I want to go right to the crystal shapes. Is that crystal shape? No, that goes with the... I'll do that with the other ones, too. Yeah, these. Here we go. I think I'm going to take my jacket off. I'm getting heat. Is anybody getting heat, or is it just me? Yeah? Okay. Before it was back spasm, now it's heat. Well, that's good. It means the back spasm released. Okay. These were a challenge. Just to figure out, just to not go cross-eyed while you're trying to line up nodes and things. All right. Now this is showing the alignment of the density 1 and density 3 negative nodes. So this would be the meiotic vortex grid. Now it's interesting because, new words, we have the meiotic grid that refers to the vortices that form at the points of crossover, but the crystal itself is called the meionic crystal. And it's made of myons, spelled with a Y, which I believe are the probably grandparents on the etheric level of myons and dions from D4 and D5. But there's lots in between before they get down to D4 and D5. So we have the myonic crystal body. That is the magnetic crystal body. That is the one that rules the magnetics. And it actually, what's really enough to make you nuts too, is when you get into the natus and radius lines, it was tricky enough to, okay, I have negative axiotonal lines that give birth to positive natus lines. Yes! And the positive natus lines connect with the magnetic crystal body. We're just, trying to draw these. Wait a minute, what do I put where? Where do I do dotted lines? Where do I do solid? So there's a lot of pieces of anatomy to keep track of. And what was that went with what? The most important thing is to realize that through it all, we end up with three crystals. One is the myonic crystal that controls the magnetics. And it controls the magnetics, and it directs the flow and the conditions. The conditions of how units within the axiotonal lines, within the axiotonal lines and their natus lines will cluster. It means the crystalline shape that is formed through the interactions between these negative transmission lines, between these negative nodes. These negative nodes are drawing in frequency, positive frequency, from the magnos field, that is a positive thing generated by the negative axiotonal spins, and from the ethos field. It's drawing them in, and it's converting them and emitting negative. So the negative lines go with the negative nodes to form the magnetic crystal, or the myonic crystal. Now, the myonic crystal, the shape that takes, is determined by where the nodes are placed. All right? They cut through here, but they're actually arcing up and down to these. But by the time you get it all done through the shields, it looks like they're arcing through these. But these are actually positive ones. These center ones, the density 2 ones, they go with the dionic crystal, which is the electrical one. So these are the transmission lines that the nodes do. And because this is a positive shield node line, and so is this, they actually arc from here, from the density 3, which is the last line of negative nodes, up to the seals at D13.5. Actually, this one goes to 13.5, and the big one around it goes to 14.5, which is where the Lodi lines go. So outside of this, you have those Lodi lines and that kind of thing. And it's like inside-outside is really relative, because they're really taking place in the same space until you get down to the next set of dimensional levels. When you get down into the D12.5 to D0.5, that's the next step in. If you look at it all as a sphere, that would be the next sphere level in. But all of these structures exist on each level. So there's lots of these going down the scale into density. But we have the myonic crystal. These become important in understanding them because it is these that are misaligned. All right, if you have these big crystals around you, one shaped like this, the other shaped like something you'll see in a minute, and then they come together to form the third one that is the big crystal body around you, they're all supposed to be lined up with their north in the right place, where north and south and east and west match up. And what we have a condition on the planet right now is we have this one is tilted at, I believe it's 11 3/4 degrees off natural north, and the other, the electrical one, is 23.5 degrees off, which gives you your geographical tilt that holds the ecliptic in place, and the 11 3/4 is what gives you, it's actually a wobble within a wobble, it gives you the magnetic displacement. That's why even geographical north and magnetic north don't stay in the same place, and everything's wobbling all over the place. That's not natural. It might appear in nature, yes, when nature's mutated it does, but it's not a natural condition. And if this is happening on the planet, it's happening in all of our bodies, but it's also happening on a tiny level in every atom, in every cell, in every chelon that forms. Now, the chelons that I talked about before, that take, say, little units of particles, and they build up together to become chelona, and then chelona come together and form three-dimensional structures of chelons, little crystals. Well, the crystals will take, if they're currents that run the magnetics, they will take on the shape of these crystals, which when you take them into 3D, I'll show you those in a minute, they're probably too low, would form a crystalline shape that is formed by this crystalline grid. So even the tiny ones, the microcosmic ones, would have the same characteristics. And there's other things that can bend and arc through them to create other crystal forms, but they would be the core crystal forms that would actually be the accreting templates for chelons. And chelons are what are the accreting templates for atoms forming molecules and for sparks and quarks forming components of atoms. So if you have these guys out of whack, you have literally the structure of atoms out of whack. You have the relationships between protons and electrons and neutrons not interacting at the right angles of electromagnetic orbiting and those kind of things. So these are key. They're large crystal matrices of radiation that are in your fields on multiple levels, in the planetary fields and the universal fields. And they're also the radiation matrices that govern the shape of everything from your atoms and your protons and your neutrons to your blood cells and something called blood crystals. Blood crystals are an interface between the etheric and the atomic. They have very much to do with the lotus points, and the lotus points have very much to do with being ducts in the system, the etheric to atomic system, where there's a step-down process, and at a certain point, etherics and the Latore frequencies from this PCM matrix combine to form what we call atomics. And all of these are governed by the shapes of the meiotic and dyadic grid crystals. These actually form a skin. Our skin cells, and the way they sit together, like if you look at them under a microscope, cells are reproductions of, or they're supposed to be, reproductions of the forms of the crystals. There are other crystal forms that form within and through these, depending on how the currents bend as you go inward. But these are the big ones that are supposed to be. These are running the D13.5. These are the monadic imprint crystals, which are the mommy and daddy crystals, basically, that should govern the form and the relationships of all of the others. They're base 12, base 24. They can plug into the base 24 stuff from the echolota. There's just a couple of different views of looking at these. This is why these took so long, because first I had to plot them here. And I said, okay, what does that look like if it's not spread out flat like a map? So first I want to find the numbers. What node numbers? 'Cause remember, the node numbers will correspond with an axiotonal or a meridian line number. These are running on the axiotonals, even though they draw energy from the opposite. All right, but they are structured on the negative nodes that the axiotonals run through. Wait a minute, I said that wrong? No, yeah, I did. Don't worry, I'm going backwards there. Actually, I'll know. I think these are. No, wait a minute. These are the density 3 ones. Yeah, pardon me. I'm just learning this stuff too, and it's enough to make my head spin. Okay, let me just read it. All right, let's read it. PCM node myodes from the density 1 and 3 shell. I'm going to whisper this to myself just because I want to check some. Draw. Okay, they'd rather eat those, yeah. I think I'll just read it too. You can read it actually because you've got it in your laps. Yeah. So, all right, the PCM node myodes, which are the negative charge nodes from the density 1 and 3 shields, draw positive 33 1/3 ethos units from the meridian lines, okay, and 11 2/3 positive clockwise units from the D13.5 magnosphere. And they do it via the transfiguration points. Remember those little transfiguration point, three clusters of signets? So they draw it from those lines, through those, into forming this radiation matrix structure around it. Now let's see, huh? They always describe it better than I can when I paraphrase. So I will just read this. Some of this is so complicated to my brain that I'm really tired. All right. So they do it through, they draw the frequency in from those lines via the transfiguration points in the lotus sphere to leosphere lens, converting the 11 2/3 positive clockwise electric magnos particate units to negative 11 2/3 counterclockwise chelona, there we go, atomic units. And remember, atomic is the atomic of the Eka, okay? I mean, this stuff gets really mind-bending. Some of you can probably follow this a lot better than me, particularly since I haven't had enough sleep. But these units that are formed this way, these chelona units that are particate units that are 11 2/3 positive clockwise etheric magnos, are the ones they converted into chelona atomic units called myons. So that's what they were. The magnos units were brought in through the transfiguration points and converted by the myodes into myons. the myodes transmit negative charge, the VE is the charge, we're just referring to charge, counterclockwise muon currents between themselves and between the north and south D13.5 seals. Muon Kelana units accrete into clusters of chelons that form a myonic radiation matrix of 11 2/3 negative charge counterclockwise crystalline muons called the meiotic crystal grid. The meiotic crystal grid, meiotic crystal body, so it's the meiotic crystal grid, the gridding system, but the meiotic crystal body that forms through the meiotic grid serves as the structural atomic, atomic, Torre-based morphogenetic field within which the nadial body capsule and natis lines form as D13.5 muons are stepped down to eventually form the atomic currents of PCM manifest matter. Negative charge myodes of the meiotic grid spin counterclockwise, generating counterclockwise meiotic vortices that draw energy out of atomic manifestation and into atomic expression. That was a mouthful. I'm surprised I can read at this point. My eyes are tired. So anyway, this is the beginning of teaching us about these things and how they plug into the thing. This is the meiotic crystal grid. These, again, do set the pattern for the formation of crystallization, which is the formation of radiation units coming together to form things that eventually become molecules, atoms and molecules and matter. So if there's a distortion in the crystal body, there will be a distortion in the currents that progressively step down, and there will be a distortion in the matter units that form on them and anything built on those matter units. Now, this is the shape down here. Let me move that up a little, honey. When you take that big thing and you fold it around and put it into a three-dimensional plane, this is the basic shape you get. See, these would be behind. They would be going around the side and around the back. These are the numbers of the myodes. And remember, they're the density 3 and the density 1 myodes. They would be the numbers, so they're very specific numbers. They have very specific connections to specific meridian and axiotonal lines. This would show you the numbers and the ones that are in the front, right? And then the ones that start to go around the back. This is showing you without the numbers so you can see better what the shape of the grid actually is, you know, without the shield lines running through it and all of that. It shows you the shape of the transmission lines of myons that the myonic grid makes to form the myonic crystal. This, again, is spread out, all right? The whole thing, when you fold it around, that's the shape you get. So that is basically the crystal structure. This is the meiotic grid showing the negative muon transmission lines alone. It doesn't have the points that are showing you where the nodes are, so you can see where exactly what's intersecting. Believe me, these were a pain. Each one of these was a full-size drawing that then had to be reduced and all that kind of stuff. And then after I got them all done, I realized they weren't quite perfectly arranged straightly. And then at a certain point, when you want to show the lines running through them horizontally, I mean, not vertically, you can tell. It's like, oh, no. Yeah, so I have like millions of these scattered all over the place in various forms of repair and disrepair. Yeah, but these are good enough for now. They give you the basic idea. This is showing that crystal in relation to the main Cathara grid. All right, remember, inside of those, you'd have all those little density Cathara grids and all of that. So it's showing you, here's where the Cathara grid 12 would be. So you'd have 12 and 1. Then here, I believe, I didn't mark that. I think that's, depends on which one I look at. That's probably 13. I think that's the 13 point. Because I get into the others where I'm showing the 0.5 points. That might be the 13.5 point. I usually mark them because unless you're, you know, totally obsessive about measuring each one from one graph to the next, and I just don't have the time. Yeah, I think that might be the 13.5 point. Yeah, I can usually figure it out. But usually halfway between there and there is 13, though. So some of these, we'll find this somewhere because I have these where I actually showed here exactly where what was. And I believe that's 12, and I think that became 13 there, and I think that's 13.5, or it's either that or that is 13.5. And then if you translate that down into here, you just kind of like measure. So I haven't marked on one of them, so I won't even try to guess it until I find which one I marked it on. Ideally, they'd all be marked, but we're not there yet. Like I said, this is pre-publication stuff. But it's enough to show you that, you know, the basic things of how pieces fit together. And this, if you could, you know, imagine it at an 11 point. I think the drawings that I ended up with, just because of the picture of the Earth with its ecliptic that I had to use, so another thing drove me batty, was trying to find a science book. All right, which side is the front? If we're going for that, we know that the tilt goes to the phantom axis, so if you're looking at it, it should go over this way, but that implies you know where the front of the planet is, and there is a front to the planet, but unless you know what the shields are, what has happened to the shields and have them twisted, you have to back engineer it to find out where the front actually is, and it's hard to do. So the diagrams you'll see later, I believe, because the illustration in the book that I had to use as my base, okay, that's showing like how science depicts it, right? Was looking at the planet. And I think did it have Africa in the front or America? Because it ends up reversing which side you'd see the pole tilts on. But anyway, imagine this, whichever side you want to look at, tilted to the about 11 3/4 off natural. And that is what controls the whole magnetic grid alignments on the planet. In certain materials that like to call themselves the magnetic master, there's a whole channeled bunch of stuff that gets into the magnetic master. It was messing with this crystal, this part of the planet's anatomy that they were doing. The work they were doing was about making sure that stayed in its misalignment and activating it while it was in its misalignment. There's a corresponding crystal that goes with this, which is the electrical one. So you have the electrical grids and the magnetic grids. The electrical grids are often referred to simply as the crystal grids. And they're all really crystal grids, but the others would be crystal light grids. These would be magnetic sound grids. So there's light and sound are actually made of the same substance. They're all made of these etheric and interdimensional levels of etheric, not etheric, frequencies that are spark pulse currents. So that is the common thing. Light and sound both have substance to them. They're both actually effects of the behavior of these spark pulse currents and their radiation units. Really, light is not something unto itself. It is electromagnetic radiation waves, and some of them you can see, and they call those visible light. But what you're seeing are the interactions and the wave and particle forms of spark pulse currents and how they interact. And they interact with each other because of the mechanics set by the crystal body radiation matrices, which is set by the placement of the dyadic points or nodes within the teleosphere grid, which is set by the shield programs. Remember, those teleospheres were originally flat programs in the shields that were then brought up into vertical projection with the vortices. So this whole thing is interrelated. This creates this, creates this, creates this. What gets really neat is that this gets all the way down to where you see even where the chakras come from, where they're created. And I'm still trying to figure out which comes first. Like, there's about 6 different parts that once you get into the pillar that all go together and end up bringing it into the atomic. And I'm still going around in circles like, where's A? Right? I know they all go together, and one does this, and that sends it to there, and that sends it to there, but I'm just not sure which one does it first to which. Anyway, the Ionic crystal. We have another one, the Dionic crystal. I think it's pretty fascinating how they pull little units of energy, from ones that have the opposite polarity, and then they form a different structure with those, following the pattern. It's just rather fascinating. This one is a little bit harder to see because I have it in a dotted line. There's a whole dotted line matrix that looks like this that's running through here, but it is hard to see. You can probably see it better, I hope, on your thingies. The shape that it creates is this shape. It's like a little barrel. Which one? Probably. Yeah, I haven't got that far. I'm trying to assimilate too many other things. You're probably absolutely right. Wouldn't doubt. So this is the electrical dionic crystal body, which is formed through the dyadic vortice grid. The dyadic vortice grid is formed by the positive nodes, and what they do is they set the vortices that they create from their spin, they send energy in through the transfiguration points. They send it inward toward the center of the sphere, where the myodes are taking it outward toward the loading. So they're part of the inhale-exhale process, the ionic and dyadic grids. This crystalline structure forms again. This time you have the density 4, density 2, and the ethos density 4 grid that forms, it makes a larger crystal, and it makes a more shallow angle of climb, so it completely changes the shape. That's why it's not shaped the same way as the Ionic grid would be shaped. I'm going to lift this a little, honey, please. The basic shape of that in relation to the Cathara grid of the Ionic crystal in relation to the Cathara grid is that. So it is a different shape. It has different facets, different angles, and they interact with each other. The Ionic and the Ionic crystals are in the same place in space. Every teleosphere implies a set of the axiotonal and meridian lines, which implies a magnos field and an electros field, which implies the formation of a Ionic and Ionic crystal grid, which, as we skipped over and looked at quick before, implies that there are radius lines and natus lines. So each level of coming inward, and it actually expands outward from the inside, that we'll probably get to later, but it expands outward with that spark coming out through the shields, and then one level forms, the D13.5 level, then the next level, which forms from D12.5, which would be about here, to 0.5, which is right before 1. So there's another set of spheres that form there, and there's some illustrations that show that more clearly as we move on in this. But this is just showing one level of where you see a teleosphere. This is what it implies. It implies a crystal body and all these other parts, and all these other interactions and stepping ups and downs of currents. Because one will step up where you have the 33 1/3 and 11 2/3 combining to form a 45, and then another set will step down, and there's a middle set that creates a different type of current where you subtract one from the other, and you end up with a 21 2/3 deflection field current that actually becomes the main currents that come down to form the ethos body, and they interact with other things, and eventually you end up with that much frequency coming in, but on the axiotonal line level. It's really complex. The flows are enough to make me crazy. But when we go back to the other thing, you'll see where the flame bodies come in with the radius lines and the natus lines, and the next level in the flows are the yin and the yang flow, and all of this is forming inside. I believe which ones? I think, I have to double check, I think it's the electricals that form inside the electrical. I think they go electrical, but I have to double check this. This is where it was making me nuts, because I wasn't going to put it in print unless I was, I knew that it was right. And I'm just learning this stuff myself, and when you're tired and you've been up for way too long, to try to keep track of this many things, after doing, I'll show you another diagram in a minute, that was the one that pushed me like over the edge, where it's like, if I can speak about this stuff, I'll be amazed. Because I need to study it, and I need to be awake while trying to teach it. I'm awake, and I'm functional. But this stuff, maybe it's me, and I always wondered if I was just slightly dyslexic. Because I used to, for ages, I had to feel where my vaccination was to remember which was my left arm. I did. Wait until we were about 25 or so, we had to do that. I don't know why. It just, or pick up a pencil, because we're left-handed. And if we just picked up a pencil and went to write, well, that's the left. But we had this thing. So there might be a little blockage there, I don't know. But maybe this would be easy for some of you that don't have that problem. But it was really challenging for me. Well, we got them down. It will be right in the writing, as far as I know. Because they'll usually tell me if it's, before it goes into print, they'll say something, why don't you look at that again? Okay. And I was like, okay, what? And I was like, right there. And they'll show me if it's wrong. So you can read this and you'll get more out of it than me trying to explain it off the top of my head, because I'm still reading it and studying it. Give me a week or two and I'll be able to probably parrot it pretty good. But this is a lot more detailed than I like to go, actually. But it helps to understand, because when you see the detail that's here, it's like, you once had as one said a saying, he said something about he really liked the material because you couldn't get a razor blade between it. Like two rocks that you couldn't get a razor blade between. It was just, very, very cohesive with itself. And, and it didn't contradict itself. You know what I mean? It was very consistent all the way through. And it really is. What's kind of neat was, ages ago, they talked about the DNA template as the diamond sun. They talked about the different sun templates. They called the DNA templates the diamond sun. There's the ruby sun, the emerald sun, a bunch of different ones. What's really neat is they brought it back to that. And we haven't heard them talk about it, in those terms in quite a long time. When Voyages first came out, they were talking about it in those terms. Now we find out why, as we move through these stages of understanding how the crystal body develops as a radiation matrix. And there's really a reason why they call it a sun. And that has to do with the thing I mentioned before about the sun, S-O-N, no, S-U-N, of God, right? Your God body, your Christ body, the body of Christ, or Christ, however you prefer to say it. Yeah. This is called the diamond sun. Right? And it is literally, the crystal bodies form a sun with rays, and just like when you see the pictures of the sun up there, that is what the crystal body forms on the etheric levels. It does its plasma things just like the sun does. It has the same internal processes that the sun has that makes it create all that plasma and all the heat and all of those things. It is a living sun. And we're sitting in the center of one, each one of us. We all have one of these, which is exciting. Things that don't have the full diamond templates don't. That's the difference. Everybody started with one. But things that have de-evolved to the point where they can't plug back in to the higher currents of the Lota are not able to activate the sun bodies anymore. They are not able to activate the body of Christ anymore. And we still have the ability to do that. And that's what they're giving us the technology to do now. And that has to do with the double arcs and all that. So can we move to the next one, please? What do I have on the next one? Oh, yeah, this is putting the two of them together. Yep, this is called the ionic crystal body. That's when the currents from those two interact with each other and form the third one around them, which is the 45 charge one. This would be your, on the D13.5 to 13.5 level, would be your Lotos crystal. On the D12, the smaller one, the whole set of them that forms inside from D12.5 to D0.5, would be called your Logos. That's where that word, that's what it means. And indeed, it is your God body. But we all have one, not just the planet. You know, they talk about the planetary logos called Sunat Kumara. Is not. That is not the name of it. You know, that is a Nibiruan name. Anyway, you know, but this is the crystal, the big one that forms around. You have the two polarized crystals, and you can look at them as the male and the female. All right, the magnetic one, the Ionic crystal, is the female and governs the magnetics, and the Dionic crystal is the electrical one, the male, and governs the electricals. And, you know, so it's not too hard to keep track of that way. If you want to keep track of exactly what is made of what currents that it took from where and what does it do with them once it gets them and all that stuff, all power to you. Yeah, we'll take it down if it's there, you know, if it's coming clear. But as far as if you really want that detail, we'll make sure there's some writing on it. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. Because it's exhausting, this stuff. I don't know about you guys, but you wouldn't want me. Would you want me to like go into heavy detail on that stuff? Because if you really want me to learn how to do that, I will. But it could be frightening. You'll all be snoring in your chairs. I don't care what spins what way. Just tell me what to do with it. You know what I mean? Nice to know it's there. Nice to know if I wanted to know the information is there. Great. But what do we do with it? Yeah, let's get practical. You know, if we had ages and eons to play with this information, you know, that would be one thing. But we don't. It's being stuffed down the tubes here on this planet, like whenever there's an opening, you know, and we just hear going, oh no, windfall, coming, here we go. And then there'll be like a week where you're waiting and you're trying to get something done and it just shuts off. And you can still hear them. And they're saying, having a problem with the grids, can't get it through, can't run the plate line through. It's like, but you left off in the middle of a sentence. Yeah, you said there were 12 pages, I'm on 7. That it's still there. We'll get it through eventually. There's one that went with this stuff that, remember, it stopped. You typeset it for me. We went up to, I think, page 14, and then it stopped mid-sentence. I know, and it still didn't come back. I didn't get the other half of that yet. So anyway, it works strange like that. But all of these transmissions that we talk about, these frequency downsteps, they're coming from the echo level. They have to come through these crystals. So if we have, on the planetary level, not to mention the galactic level, because it's the big black hole at the center of our galaxy and those kind of things, they're having a little crystal body problem, too, on the galactic level. And it has to do with some things that happened in the Pleiades a very long time ago when we used to be part of the Pleiades. But anyway, and Gaia as well. But they have to come through the specific angles that these crystals make. They are transmission line angles. And when you have the crystal bodies, they're supposed to be lined up with their north, all of them, in relation to the Eka. You know, there's a specific way where you have your Vecca axes are this way, and then your Eka is that way, and they all interact at very specific angles of projection, and that way they can breathe together, and they're all synchronized. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not working that way down here, because this one isn't able to plug into the other two, because the other two, one's misaligned, the electrical, at 23.5 degrees off natural solar north, and the magnetic one is 11 3/4 degrees off, about, approximately, or 11 3/4. It actually varies, and it wobbles around the other one. And later, when we get toward the end, it'll be at the end, where we see that the gravitron mess that they have as far as the vortices and what they've done with the Rouchet spiral. You'll see how those alignments are actually being held in the planet. And it also implies they're being held in your body. And in each little molecule, each little atom, each little set of quarks is having this problem, because it fractalizes down to the tiniest and up to the largest structures that are built on it. And it all comes from a misalignment of the ionic and dionic crystals. And that's not easy to do. It takes a lot of beaming things when they're at vulnerable points in a natural evolutionary cycle with heavy-duty psychotronics, which are like phototronic pulses, and like they use sonics to nail the magnetic one, and they use electricals, photosonic, photo what? New word, different word. That's the usual one. So never mind. It's a bigger word. I haven't heard that word yet. It's some kind of specialized something. Yeah. They'll talk about that sometime, but it's not important right now, they said. But it has to do with what they did to the shields, that they could actually create this much of a mess. We do know one thing. When we get to the end and we see the diagrams to help us understand how the Rouchet spiral plugs into that template, the tribal shield template and the planetary shield template that we've used to do rounds, when we see what the distortion in, they've actually taken what would be a normal set of the gates, right, where you have your normal layout, and it's as if they've shattered each of the circles that would be the shield for that particular Stargate, and ripped it in half and force bonded half of this one with half of that one, and change the angles of both of them to make a different configuration. So you have a mess. What that does, if you do it in the shields, remember, it's the shield programs that when the flame, the pulse comes out from the center, it runs through the shields, and it picks up the template, and it makes vector projection vortices that become the teliosphere. So when you mess up the shields, you mess up what's happening in the teliosphere. You change the shape and the function of the teliosphere, which means you change the shape and function of the crystals and everything else within them. And that's how they harnessed this universe. That's, they played big games with rather large spaceships, actually, when it all first started. They were Merkabah spaceships, but they were quite metal. They weren't like just etheric, pretty things that fly in the sky. They had quite a metal component to them, and they had some nasty weaponry. And that weaponry was used to nearly destroy this planet, actually, and a lot of others. There were some. Earth is actually in a good shape compared to some. There are a lot of planets that fell. Procyon was one of them, and that was absolutely decimated. I mean, I still get chills when I just even mention it, because I know I have incarnational memory there. And a whole race was taken down and turned into zombies before they took them down. I mean, literally like they're doing here, where everybody, oh yes, let's go do an Archangel Michael workshop. Yeah, great. Where there were a few left going, no, please. As they were watching their entire race be genetically mutated beyond the point of recognition to where there was a point of no return, and there was none of them left. That species, it's almost like a Noah's Ark kind of thing. There wasn't anybody left to take, but there were some DNA left that could be combined and restarted. That's what they're trying to do here. And they've done it in other places. And as far as, yes, we all came from one source, and yes, we still love them too, but jeez, talk about kids with a problem. How long do you get unplugged from the Christos? There's a consciousness of love and of understanding how you work with everything in creation, how it was all created through a loving source. And we're embodiments of that source. When you start to lose connection to those higher frequencies, you're losing connection to that consciousness, and it can turn you in, you kind of implode as consciousness, even if you still have a body form, and you get sick, mentally ill. And beings, you can be highly intelligent and highly mentally ill simultaneously. That's very easy to do. And that's what we're dealing with here. But races of beings who make very psychotic decisions because they honestly don't know how to do any better at this point. But you can be as kind as you want to them. It is not going to change the fact that if they can, they will eat you alive if it serves their purposes, with no remorse. It's kind of like you see those TV shows that do those amazing things about mass murderers. Like, how could they do that? There's no remorse at all? No. It amazes humans to think there's actually something that could do something devastating to another being and have no remorse. Because humans and indigos, just the thought of doing something terrible to somebody makes you feel bad. You know, you care about other things. But there are actually beings out there who don't have that frequency. And that's where indigos and humans need to wise up. That's what got us in this predicament on this planet in Atlantis. The bleeding hearts of the universe. We must have all been democratic or something. I don't know. Or socialist. But we let the planet get run over, literally, because we didn't want to upset them or hurt anybody's feelings or infringe our beliefs on them. Great, just let them take over the planet then. Well, we did. No, I mean, maybe not you guys, but there was groups of us that were stuck in these great negotiating committees where, okay, they're doing this, yes. Yes, but it is their right. They have a right to express their chosen path of action. Yes, they do. Do they have a right to blow up the planet too? What about us? Do we have a right to just sit here and watch? And a lot of us said, oh, but we shouldn't get involved. We're peaceful beings. Yes, but they're trashing the planet. Should we not say something? Yeah. Well, they won't listen anyway. I know. So maybe we should do something, right? And there was a lot of hedging and hawing, and the humans kind of said, oh, but we love them so much. They'll come around. And we're going, oh, God, sounds like us 250 billion years ago, back in Lyra. You know? But here we are. It's because of, there is a way to love, but if you really love a being, you don't let it run around amok and destroy other things, because it's not helping it either. You're not doing it any favors. It's like a parent that's too liberal, eh? Yeah, that doesn't put the foot down, and the kid just keeps doing, and getting worse and worse, and ends up having a miserable life because most of society won't put up with it. Well, we had an opportunity, the guardians of this planet did, to be firmer in dealing with races that would do the great kiss up. Oh, yes, we want to be of you. Oh, yes, we want bioregenesis. And as soon as we get in there, we're going to grab those books and run, and then we're going to control the Templar, that kind of stuff. Just too slow on reaction time. And we're here now. Now we're making a stand. And it's not a war stand at all. They can take it any way they want to. But we told them we weren't going to walk away. Not here. Not after Procyon. Not after a few other places. They didn't believe us. Well, we're still here. They still get amazed. Like yesterday, and they ran down the mountain. Oops. I didn't mean to scare them or anything. We're not doing anything negative, but what we're doing is holding the anchoring rods for the echo frequencies. And there's one thing that no matter how many lies they can tell, no matter how much they can con us, one thing they can't do is run those frequencies or anything that can touch them. So if they're trying to pull one over, we can be as clueless as we want to be, but if we're running those frequencies, there's not a lot they can do about it. So that kind of freaks them out a little because they're used to bullying and taking what they want by manipulating and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, we have a challenge of loving them still, anyway, and still saying, sorry, yes, I am standing there. You want to keep your crystal there? That's fine with me. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll make my day. Yeah, I'll give it a little gift of energy. Anyway, crystal bodies. We have still the ability to turn on our levels of the ionic crystals. The ionic crystals are the ones that are the unified frequencies of the dionic and the myonic crystals. And you have the lotosphere, the logosphere, the step down photosphere, the ovosphere, the huvosphere, and then the 5 huvas inside that. So, yeah, and they're all teleospheres, all with their axiotonal and meridian line sets, all with their crystal body sets, all with their natus and radius line sets, and all with their yan-yun flows, and a bunch of other stuff that comes after that. Yeah. So it's a very beautiful system, actually. It's just amazing. And it's like complex, but it's also, there's a simplicity to it that's absolutely gorgeous. You can see it in some of the diagrams. There's just a balance that feels good Yeah, symmetry. That's just really lovely, especially when you picture it all alive and moving. Next one, please. Where? Oh, okay. Yeah, a little literal there. It's no. Partakai nodes draw in, not drawn in. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's probably quite a few between my scribbles. Good, you must have caught me because I know I was writing fast trying to get here on time. The crystal bodies form, this would be considered the main points of the meiotic dyadic grid. These are points in the meiotic dyadic grid that forms through the interaction points of those crystals in the different crystal bodies. Remember, you have the ionic crystal that forms meiotic vortices that draw energy out. You have the dyadic crystal, and when these places cross over, they form little Merkaba fields, where the dyadic crystal has its incoming vortices, and the meiotic crystal forms its outgoing vortices. Now, there's other lines that are very interesting, and it was like I knew there were lines that went in on the diagonal, but I didn't know what they were. I mean, I thought for a while they were the radius, they were the ray somethings, but I didn't know what they were. We'll find that out today, what they are. They come through these points, they cross through the meiotic dyadic grid and through the transfiguration points, and they form, this is officially considered the meiotic dyadic grid, and it includes the meiotic dyadic crystal grids, but it also includes something called the radionic heliopath paths. Heliopath. I always want to say lines, but they're not. They're heliopaths. Paths for helios. Paths for the ecocentral sun frequencies to come in, right? And they come through these points. These are the exterior lotus points. So you have, I forget how many. It's been a while since I looked at this. But there are sets of them. Inside here, you would have the pillar of power, and the lotus points that we were taught to work with, the 24 lotus points, are the interface between the pillar of power and the outside ones. So they are literally the step between where all this stuff, through all of these, there's a step-down process that occurs that takes it into the pillar. Then these lotus the inner lotus points take it out directly into the atomic and back again. So they are at the inner point of all of these lotus points. These are also considered lotus points. I think you have lotum points are these guys, I believe. Yeah, these are, let's see, there's a list someplace that has these broken down. So I haven't studied this much, and this came through a while ago compared to what I just got beamed with. But we have lotus points are the inside ones. Then we have, I believe, loti points that go with the PCM loti that circulate frequency, and these go into the radon cells, by the way, so this is connected to that radon cell stuff in the pillar. Loti points that go with the PCM. Then we have lotum points that connect the PCM to the PKA, Loti crystal, and then you have Lota points, or Lote points, Lota points, that connect both of those, the Lotum and the PCM Loti, into the Lota. And these are like lines that come in, like if the center's there of the sphere, they come in like sun rays, like. Right. So this is where you begin. There's another diagram that'll show it a little bit better. I would have had fun with it, but there wasn't time to do a nice big one that really showed all of them. It would have taken days actually to put all of them in. As they're spiraling tubes, and those tubes spiral in frequency in the form of pulsar plasma waves, which are waves structured like they're part etheric, part atmic, coming from the Lodi level. Is that one the next one? Yeah, we'll put that up now. So you have your ionic crystal, you have your dionic crystal, you have your ionic crystal. Together, they form this radiation matrix. This radiation matrix forms these series of points of crossover. Meiotic dyadic grid is also the ionic grid. This level would be the ionic grid, where it pulls in from the echolota. And this is just showing the shield nodes, so you still have orientation. Each one of these creates a heliopath, or a radionic heliopath. These are tubes, spiraling tubes of energy that draw in the pulsar waves, which are pulsar plasma, hydroplasmic waves, in. I think they start as thermoplasma, actually. They start as heat, gaseous heat, and then downstep into liquid light, which would be hydroplasm, and then progressively downstep, as they go through into the densities. But these bring them into the center of the shields. Some of them come right into the middle seed atom point. Others come into the smaller seed atoms in the density levels. And you have these rays. And when the energy is coming in, and I get nuts with the inhale and exhaling here, but when they give me the technique, which I believe they're going to give me over dinner time, I think they're going to give it to me in writing, because when I'm this tired, it's not a good idea to try to beam it through live, because I get dizzy, actually, when it comes through, when I'm this tired. So I think they're going to get it in writing, which is good, because that means there might be a chance of getting photocopying done. Because even if it's in handwriting, if I write clear enough, might. Because I really would like to have, I prefer it when they give me the techniques first, because that, if anything, that would be the most valuable thing you can take with you. But sometimes they do it this way, where I don't even know what the techniques are. I've just seen it doing something in my field, right? So we're waiting for that. But this is where it gets exciting. This is the sun body. We have the top of that. Is that where the one did that? Yeah, that has the words. This is the diamond sun body of Christ. The diamond sun. It is a sun. It is a protoplasmic sun, I believe they call it. It's made of pulsar waves. This is what? And this is massive. And it has layers of it. Remember those otospheres? I'll just call them otospheres for short, right? All those otospheres, right? All the way out. It is the ability to turn these back on again, to turn the heliopaths. This is heliopathic healing. To be able to turn those on again. Now, for those to work, these need to be in alignment. They're not. So these have been blocked. We've not been able to receive the pulsar waves that regenerate and perpetually refuel the seed atom, that allow the natural circulation to take place. The way to fix this is through the central pillar itself. What we're going to do is anchor again the Rushate spiral, which is something that we're going to get into. Let's see how far we are. It's quite a ways back there. Oh, yeah, that breathing stuff is before that. Oh, no. There's another set of those that just came through, and I'm going, oh, boy. So, anyway, this is our body of Christ. This is our Christ body. It is the body, the crystal body that forms, the diamond sun, that forms when all of the parts are working properly and your connection to Source is open and you are breathing and living. Your blood cells, your blood crystals would have that form. That means they would be processing those pulsar waves. Your body should be able to process these. It should be able to come in through the little mana windows that are supposed to be in the center of your atoms. And right now, all of that has been shut off. We're going to realign these by opening the breathing tube of this one, and that will allow the natural Rushate spiral to come down from the echo level. Now, that's going to come down on the planet anyway, so it's a good thing to open your circuits, so when it comes, it moves through you instead of, well, it'll move through you one way or the other, put it that way. It's going to move through this planet one way or the other. With us here, because we have the ability to open our breathing tubes, we can make it an easy landing, which will make it much easier on the planetary grids. With the stuff that they're throwing through from the Buddhara wormhole at this point, I mean, it's amazing the planet hasn't imploded. They're linking that whole series from over the California matrix over there. And we've got Mount St. Helens kicking up again. There was something that happened up in Alaska not too long ago. Now, the HARP thing is all linked into this. All right? So you have that. I'm surprised Hawaii's not rumbling, because it links all the way out. The Buddhara wormhole matrix links all the way out there. They're linking it through Mexico and the Yucatan. That's why we needed to go to Belize, and with an invitation from the Tothis. Help! Yes, okay. Linking it right through the turnstile matrix in the Gulf of Mexico, right through the Gruol in Sarasota, Florida, and out into the wormholes. And what do we have? What's this, the sixth hurricane that's coming up on its way up to Florida? In what, 4 weeks? Something like that? 2 more due. Oh, glad we moved. Jeez. This is the beginning, and this isn't our stuff that's doing this, but the frequencies we're bringing into the grids can really help to hold the grids against some of this stuff. Because if not, it's just going to rip the planet apart. And the fact that we have the ability to open our breathing tubes, which means the planet's going to open its breathing tube, whether or not, it's kind of like either, like a big beam coming down and saying, yes, you're opening. Wham. Whoops, what happened?
Oh, hello.
Just went into pole tilt. There's a part of me, I don't know, anyway, there's a part of me that's so excited about the sun bodies. You know, our diamond sun bodies. This is why it's the diamond sun template. It literally is a diamond, a crystal sun, a living, breathing, expanding, contracting sun. Because those grids, the crystal body grids, they're like accordions. They expand and contract. All of the crystal body levels are supposed to expand and contract. What's really neat is when you get the yin-yang flow and you put that in with the Ruchete spiral, it looks just like a set of lungs in a windpipe. It's really neat. Yeah, we'll get to those later. But this was some of the newest stuff about the heliopath tubes, and that's where they get heliopathic healing. It's like, no, not like homeopathic. It's heliopaths, pathways, right? Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. So what we're going to be taught at the end of this on, not this workshop, but the one on Saturday morning, they're going to, after we learn to begin the opening of the breathing tube, because this has to be done in synchronization with the planet, we won't be able to open ours until the planet starts to open its. And this is all connected to the zendradon cell. All right, that's the photocell. We have to get into the photocells, don't we? Yes, we do. Talking to myself. But, yeah, the zendradon photocell is, again, a storage unit. Those photocells, you can picture them in the Cathara grid, and I'll show you later in the clear Cathara grid where they're located. They run the 0.5 structure, but not exactly all the way up, not like 0.1, 0.1, 0.5, 2.5, 3.5. They're in specific locations. There's this whole process of phasing that happens between the etheric body, the ethos body, the eros body, the form, the density body, and the radon cells are all connected to that. They're called radon cells because what they do is they take the energy that comes down from these heliopathic, these are radionic heliopath tubes. When the energy comes down, when these pulsar waves come in, there's like a flash current that forms. They're called radon rays, right? And it actually lights up like a sun. And this is where you get the effect of the pulsing. And I have a feeling it's when the rays are coming in, there's a back pulse going out. That's why the rays look like they pulse out. I haven't explained that yet, but I think that's how it works. So like when you see those stars up there, way far away going boing, 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 I think every time a boing happens this way, there was a whoosh that went that way first, where the energy came in and it sent other energy back out again. And I could picture this gorgeous sun body around us, like glowing suns. It's like really exciting. Anyway, I'm like a kid with this stuff. I just like all right, I'll read if I have to. This one? You think we should do this now? Okay. Oh yeah. This gets sophisticated because this is why I like it when we can give them the chart packs, because if I don't have to go into the heavy stuff, they can read it. It's right there. But I'll read it anyway. The 3 Kelon crystal body radiation matrices of the D13.5 lotosphere together form meiotic-diotic vortice grid, a meiotic-diotic vortice grid, through which spark currents are manufactured in the interior central vertical column pillar of power. So that's where the spark currents are manufactured, in the interior pillar, are circulated. So they're circulated through these, stepped up and down to form the spectra of etheric, atomic, and catheric currents through which the Veka PCM Loti primal life force 15 ray currents and their atomic equivalents are made. The fixed meiotic, diotic, and eotic vortices formed by the spinning nodes interface with the density lotus arc transmission lines of the Loti harmonics grid, which I believe is what they call this one. They call these the crossover lines, the harmonics grid, and these the meiotic diotic points in it. Okay. So the fixed maitic, dyadic, and eotic vortices formed by the spinning nodes interface with the density lotus arc transmission lines of the Lodi harmonics grid, forming transharmonic vortice points called, this is a new one, radionic nodules, or maitic, dyadic, lota points. I thought that word was interesting because I wonder if that has anything to do with joules, because joules is a term they use to measure units of heat, right? Like when you get into calories and that kind of stuff, it's a measure of energy released from something when it's burned, right? All this has to do with, because I've been dying to find out what is this stuff that they call anything from fat to calories to all that, because I know the goop that we're walking around with in our bodies is made of this stuff, the Shona stuff. And this all comes down to units of heat or units of frozen light that are stuck in the body. And there's a whole way of understanding. If we can understand how perhaps nodules or what they bring in to the body, how that translates down here into what science calls, the units of heat that are released when something is burned, to know how much calories it has, that kind of stuff. To know how, I mean, think about it. Whether you're, fat or skinny doesn't matter, but calories, they tell us, are what we need X amount of every day to make sure we don't wither up and die, right? Because if you have too many calories, you get larger, and if you compared to what you expend, and if you don't have enough, you eventually starve to death and your body dies. Now, there's something behind that has everything to do with this. And I have a feeling that word was one of those little clues that there's something, perhaps, like zendradon heat units? I don't know. But there's more to come on that. And I found that fascinating, just the word, the radionic nodules, or maitic, dyadic, lota points. Yes? Is it? Okay, so the joule is used as a measure of electrical energy. Metric? Oh, okay. Okay. Right. Right. So I had a feeling. I just that reminds me of something I read somewhere. What is that? Nodules. I have a feeling it means something about that same measurement, but in relation to the zendradon cell. Yeah, I think that's how they're using it. But anyway, the radionic nodule transharmonic lotte point vortices form spiraling tubes of partikite wave radiation. That's these guys. That blend and circulate etheric atmic catheric currents. All right, so etheric atmic. That's when we have part etheric, which are the Le'adori based, plus the atmic, which is the Le'atori from the echo level based. That is catheric. All right, there's one place a definition popped out. What is catheric? Okay, it's etheric atmic equals catheric, which is a higher level current than would be a plain atmic, or a plain etheric, or any of the ones downstepped into the Vecca system. So the catheric, if you want to look at it this way, the catheric template would actually set the template for the etheric template. So it's the template behind the templates, but it's more than template. We're talking currents. We're talking radiation matrices made out of these units that form currents, that form structures of crystal body and lines and spheres and fields within them. So, okay, anyway. Yeah, it takes me forever to find my point again. Where does that line stop? Where am I? Yeah, catheric. There we go. Catheric currents. All right. So I like to go back where I was to remember what I said. All right. The nodules transharmonic lotte point vortices form spiraling tubes of partikite wave radiation that blend and circulate etheric, atomic, catheric currents between the loti, loti, and lota, and the interior and exterior layers of the PCM loti crystal body. The spiral tubes of partikite waves are called radionic heliopats. The partikite waves of catheric spectra that circulate through them are called pulsar waves or transfiguration point waves. And they're actually called pulsar plasma waves, but I think it was too tight to fit. Pulsar waves travel the radionic heliopats of the lotte points. Now, those lotte points were all these guys that lead into the lotus points in the inner pillar. Okay, so where am I? It takes me forever to find this again. All right, pulsar waves travel the radionic heliopaths of the lotte points, running waves to and from the 24 interior lotus points that interface between the etheric and atomic currents of the interior pillar of power. When the Lodi crystal body and its inherent anatomy is working naturally, each inhale breath contraction activates the dyadic grid and draws pulsar waves through the heliopath tubes from the lota and pulls them into the Loti pillar of power. The heliopath tubes light up, forming heliopath rays, heliopathic rays called radons. Now, obviously, radon cells have something to do with receiving these or something. Okay. Now, what gets really wild is when this one's exhaling, we're inhaling, and vice versa, and it gets really that dyslexia thing again. I don't think I'm dyslexic. I just feel like that sometimes. So this is the diamond sun crystal body with the activated radionic heliopath tubes, radon rays, and pulsar plasma. That should be plasma. That word there says phasing, but it should be plasma waves. Forms a flaming radiant sun known as the Son of God or body of Christ. That's where all of those teachings were about. All of the Christ teachings were about this. They were about the fact that you were eternal, you were created eternal. We're not separate from God. We're a manifestation of Source, of God's Source. This is what the real Jesus taught, except he didn't have a photocopier, and it was a lot harder. He did his best to project images into people's heads, though, like so he could show them that way. But it depended on the receiver as well, so it was a bit frustrating because we were a bit mutated by that point. Yeah. Okay. Next one. What are you doing? I'm going to have a sip of something to drink. Yeah, that's a major page of. I want to remember that how that worked. Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. Here's another one I needed to read the second time that I didn't get to read yet. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, please. That would be really nice. There goes the back again. I'm all right, Abigail. Thank you. Okay. Now, we'll get to the matrodon cell more later with the monadic stuff, but as far as within the crystal bodies, we have, this is where we start to get into the layers of the crystal body before I read this stuff. I don't think they're all marked on here, but we didn't have time. This is showing you the Huva bodies. Remember, for ages we've been talking about the levels of the Huva bodies, where you have the Mahara Huva body, the Beta Huva body, the Alpha Huva body, the Nada Huva body, and the Raja Huva body, which is actually connected to the ethos template and the Maharic shield that's down there. It runs the D15, 13, 14, 15 currents. But there's this really neat thing that I didn't have time to do all the other 10 diagrams that go with it that have to do with the 6 cycles of expansion and contraction that form the octave shield, and then the 7th cycle of acceleration and the 8th cycle of jump and shift kind of thing. But they also refer to it as the 6 days of creation, because there's an expansion-contraction thing that happens where each level, first we have the first expansion, or the first day, would be the expansion out of the D13.5 to D13.5, which is somewhere in here, because these actually extend to D15. But they don't come till the end, these 5. First you have the 5 energy bodies, the 5 etheric bodies and their crystals. And the first one forms in the center. They form from the center, expand out. First you'd have the lotus sphere and its teliosphere and all that stuff form. Then the next one that would come out would be the one that runs from 12.5, which would be up in this vicinity, to 0.5. That one would be the logosphere in all of its components. Then you'd have from 11.5 to 1.5 in this area, you'd have the photosphere. And then from 8.5 to, which would be up here, 8.5 to 4.5, which would be up here, you would have what's called the ovosphere. And from the center point at 6.5, this is where you get the hovosphere. And the hovosphere is what expands when on the exhale it goes and expands out and up vertically and actually extends. Its little density cathara grids extend into the D15. They go past the D13.5 and into the D15.5 and connect into D15, D15.5. So they do the full spectrum, of the primal light fields in the Vecca. And then on the inhale, they're supposed to go and come back down again. And they're supposed to go And of course, you have the other one that would be going across this way from the PKA side, from the parallel side. So you'd also have the rod thing doing its thing. You know, it's kind of a neat living machine of some sort. You know, but this is how the Hoover bodies. You'd have 6 expansions, and I believe it's on the 6th day. I think that you get the final where you get the Hoover sphere, and then the 6th day is where it all expands out, right? And then there should be a jump cycle. If you were doing the natural cycle of the octaves, there would be the tharo, which would be the electrical peak, where the electrical Merkaba would spin its fastest, which means I believe that corresponds with the radon cells releasing whatever they had stored through, that the Lodi was bringing in that hadn't been put into the pillar yet. I think that probably corresponds with that. They haven't said that yet, though. And then it would go into its RO, and then it's Elan, which would be the magnetic peak, which is probably when that frequency is downloaded into the lower bodies down into matter, and it creates the magnetic peak. And at that point, you go into the Ruche pillar reset, where the pillars would naturally come in and recharge the entire system. And actually, they show the cycle, and it's rather mind-boggling, actually, of what once you find out where your ethos and your eros are and how they phase together. Then there's this whole process of phasing that it does this for 6 cycles, or 6 breaths. And breaths are a relative term. Your breaths are much shorter than, say, the planet's breaths, which would be cycles of time, right? Evolution, yeah, rhythms. They're base pulse rhythms. And the planets and galaxies have longer ones than smaller life forms on them. It depends on how much energy is in your seed atom, basically, that sets the base pulse rhythm. But this expansion and contraction, it's the 6 days of creation that they talked about in the Bible and all that was about this, except it's a creation that's supposed to continually reoccur. It's supposed, once you, you don't just create it and then go, but our universe got grabbed by the neck somewhere in that process, and then its arc stretched out where it can't move. So this whole thing was actually seized, not fully opened, but partially. Where these are the arc lines, for the big arc lines that would go out into the full crystal body, into the diamond sun body, they were forced down into that 60-degree angle. So they can't phase. What they're supposed to do is these arcs are supposed to phase this way. The top 2 are supposed to come together here, and they intertwine with the pillar, and the bottom 2 at the same time come together there, and progressively they open the pillar. When they totally phase and go in on the inhale, they're actually going into the pillar and allowing the central tube to begin to open, and there's a whole transfer of energy that takes place. Then it exhales back out, and this is where the spiral goes and the chakras come out of the spiral, and it's really cool. It's not been able to work that way since the mutation on this planet. We're supposed to, this was a riot, I thought this was really funny. Chakras are supposed to have 4 vortices, not 2. They're supposed to be 2 on the sides. They've been shut off. They're the ones that go naturally to the antiparticle side. They are Ruche vortices on the density level. And they come in at the 0.5 scale. And it was really neat. These diagrams were wicked. I had to find, all right, where's 0.5 in relation to that? And then there was this point in some of the diagrams you'll see later where, oh yeah, and when it breathes in and inhales, they all go, and the shields come closer together. And this one's 5/8 apart, and this one's half step, and this one's a third step. And so, oh no. So I actually had to do it, I had to do the diagram of how it would be, how the dimensions would lay in a full expansion, right? And then had to cut them each out and say, okay, that one was 5/8 from there, and this one was 2/3 from there, right? To see what the shield, where the shield and the spirals would be. And that's how we got to show you, at the end we'll be able to show you what the spiral does, this Ruche spiral that we talk about, the spiral light and sound that moves up and down. There's a central vertical current. It expands and contracts. And at certain points, it makes the electrical connection, and all sorts of, electricals happen. And other points, it breaks the connection. And this whole thing is like an amazing electrical bio-being. So we're basically bio-being. That's an interesting word. Yeah, bio-being. I don't know where that came from. I must be tired. All right. Anyway, it really brings home the fact that we are very electrical. We are living electricity. We are living light. And we've been functioning like dead light for quite a long time now. And we get to turn ourselves back on, which is really, really cool. So anyway, I'll read this and get into the heavy stuff. It says, The Hoover body blueprints, these are the blueprints, because these are running the 0.5 scale, so they're the blueprints that set, they're the morph field behind what the density atomic currents will lay themselves out on to form the Hoover bodies and the content of the matter bodies that are within the Hoover bodies. Because remember, in a Hoover body is a three-dimensional light-sound body. It's like D1, D2, D3. That's a harmonic Hoover body. Right? It has also a radial body capsule around it. Remember, have radial body and flame body, and that's where we get into those natus lines and radius lines that form the little shapes of flames around us. Well, they were the big ones that we saw before. They go all those structures, the telea structures, go all the way down to the dimensional levels. You have little tiny telea spheres. Well, they're really not tiny, but they're compared to the big ones, they're tiny telea spheres on your dimensional levels. You have them on the density levels, and you have them on the bigger levels as well. So there's a lot of parts to us, to our bodies. But fortunately, they're not too hard to use once you at least know they're there, and you get a basic idea of how they connect. It gets kind of fun. I think it's fun anyway. I'm looking forward to the techniques that they give us tonight, because I want to feel what it feels like to breathe again, to really breathe through the breathing tube. Because we opened the zendradon during the Belize trip, and the planet, along with when the planet was activating its zendradon cycle. And that allows for the breathing tube to open. It's like the anchoring rod. It allows the magnetics to open to draw the electricals in, but it doesn't, the electricals are what open it. And that's what we're doing this time, and it's really exciting. I'm really wondering if the cramp I keep getting from about here to here has anything to do with this. Because it's like very strange. And usually when I get the cramping in the back, it usually means that incoming energy. And usually if it's just for talking about, it comes out in a cone on my head. Anyway, so the Hoover body blueprints expand and contract within the D6.5 Hoover sphere, which is called the ethradon photo flame cell. All right, so it's 6.5 right at the center, center Azure point. That's from there. There's one sphere, and it's from that one sphere. Then on the exhale, they go, and then on the inhale, they go and come back, or they're supposed to. And they've been stuck open, and we've been stuck in like segmented, where we can't reach the rest of ourselves because we haven't been able to inhale properly. So we're going to begin changing that, because the planet is finally changing that for itself. Now, when the matrodon mother cell, which we'll see more on, you'll see what that looks like and how it works. When the matrodon mother cell in the lota exhales or expands, the dyadic grid and the positive dionic crystal body of the PCM loti diamond sun crystal body activate. So when the matrodon in the lota exhales, the dyadic grid and the dionic crystal body of the loti activate. As the Eka lota body exhales, so the Eka's exhaling, the PCM loti diamond sun inhales, contracts, drawing positive energy in from the lota via the dyadic grid lote points. When the PCM loti inhales and contracts, the lote points transfigure the incoming positive lota energy into radionic pulsar transfiguration plasma waves. The pulsar plasma waves enter the incoming radionic heliopath tubes of the PCM diamond sun. Notice the diamond sun's referring to the whole crystal body thingy. Okay. The pulsar plasma waves begin phasing within the heliopath tubes. So they are waves that phase within themselves, which means they would be tritonal waves. They'd have the three polarities, so they have the ability to spark. So they begin phasing. There we go. Phasing within the heliopath tubes, forming catheric. Remember, catheric was atmic and etheric put together, right? Etheric, atmic, etheric, yes. So basically atmic is higher atomic. It's Eka level atomic, right? Okay. So anyway, forming catheric spark pulse current rays called radons. The pulsar plasma waves follow the heliopath tubes through the interior lotus points. Okay, so they come all the way through the outer paths, down in through the lotus points that we've been working with, right? Through the interior lotus points, and enter storage units within the pillar of power called photosonic and photoradionic radon photoflame cells. All right, so these are positioned in the pillar of power within the central column of the Cathara grid. And they are receivers and transmitters of frequency, basically, but specifically the frequency that comes in and out through the radon lines, through the heliopath lines. Upon exhale, or expansion, of the PCM Lodi diamond sun, the crystal body, the meiotic grid and ionic crystal activate the outgoing heliopath tubes and draw negative charge energy out of the pillar of power, sending it back to the lota via the lote points as photosonic waves. So it takes as photosonic or sound waves. It clears the pillar of power of energy that had circulated before, as it has put in the right before. It charged the radon cells, so they're waiting for something.